How are we doing on populating the room?
We're at 62 and counting.
Are people still coming in?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
All right, we're holding at 64. I believe we can begin.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. It is Friday, June 3rd, 2022, and this is the monthly public meeting of the Oregon Housing Stability Council. And as always, we begin with a roll call. So, Cheola, if you can do that, please.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Councilmember DeFantorum.
Here.
Councilmember Farrell.
Here.
Chair Hall.
Here.
Councilmember Higginbotham.
Here.
Councilmember Lee.
Here.
Councilmember Mena. Councilmember Sandoval.
Here.
Thank you.
So it looks like we've got 6 of 7 council members online, which would constitute a quorum.
Correct.
All right. First item on the agenda is public comment. And we ask that you use the raise hand function to make it a little easier to find you. We've got 5 people who had signed up in advance, so we'll give them the platform first. And then if there's anyone who hasn't signed up but wishes to comment, the time will be available. And as always, we ask you to hold your comments to 3 minutes maximum, if at all possible. Brianne Whitaker.
Hi there.
Good morning.
Hi, my name is Brianne Whitaker. I live next door to a low-income apartment building and have lived in low-income dwellings most of my adult life. But I have some concerns about things that are going on with my neighborhood and some of the oversight that I was sort of expecting from places like Oregon Housing and Community Services, actually. A main question of mine for you is, who's responsible for the oversight of the habitability of places, especially when there are problems with sewage, with leaking, with asbestos and that sort of thing, when it's reported by neighbors and tenants, and we're not sure where to look for guidance, for supervision, for penalties, that sort of thing. I'm also curious about how criminal background checks for low-income tax credit properties are reviewed. Who's responsible for the oversight of those? Who monitors the compliance of all of this? Really, I'm quite curious about who's responsible for monitoring and penalizing bad actors when it comes to low-income housing, because my main concern really is the vulnerable people living inside of this dwelling who are at risk of violent crime. I just can't, I'm sorry, I'm getting choked up thinking about my neighbors that live in that building that are just experiencing abject squalor. And every time we try to report something, the responsible party from the city, from you all, whoever it might be, always responds to, oh, we talked to building owner. Oh, we talked to property manager. They said it's fine. They said they're in compliance. They said they're doing their necessary criminal background checks. They said but nobody actually comes to the property unannounced to take a look, to make sure people are vulnerable people are not being taken advantage of just for tax credits. I think that's my 3 minutes.
Thank you. Director Bell, could we obtain Ms. Whitaker's contact information and have staff follow up with her?
Yeah, thank you for that, Chair Hall, and much appreciation for Ms. Whitaker's comment. We can absolutely get her information and connect her to our portfolio administration team to better understand the situation and make sure there's due diligence and follow-up.
Great, thank you. Erica Ledesma is next. Is Erica online?
Thank you for doing that. You went a little holistic. I like that.
Erica Ledesma.
Good point.
It's
I
about-
do not find her on the list right now.
All
She's
right, how
not.
about Kevin Cronin?
Hey, everyone. Chair Hall, members of the council. I am Kevin Cronin, Director of Member Services and Industry Support with Housing Oregon, representing our 70 nonprofit affordable housing members, organizations, and their allies. I'm here to share our members' profound disappointment in OHCS's decision within the draft fiscal year 2023 legislative agenda to shift funding for new affordable home ownership development from LIFT Article 11Q general obligation bonds to revolving loan funds. Despite challenges utilizing LIFT for home ownership, the program has nonetheless worked since 2016 as a strategy for fulfilling OHCS's home ownership priority in the statewide housing plan. We urge OHCS to reconsider dropping LIFT as a funding resource for home ownership development. Our members feel strongly that revolving loan funds simply do not work effectively as a strategy for serving households earning at or below 80% AMI, as is the current income requirement for LIFT. Our members accessing LIFT for home ownership development have successfully utilized the program to help low-income Oregonians achieve home ownership, particularly with households of color and in rural communities, key priorities of the statewide housing plan. Despite the administrative challenges inherent in utilizing the current LIFT general obligation bonds for home ownership development, it is what our members have to work with. Do not throw it out absent a tried and true program to proven to successfully move the dial in shifting disparate home ownership rates for Oregon's communities of color. A subsidy such as LIFT is a far better tool for achieving permanent affordability within the constraints of OHCS's home ownership program when structuring developments as community land trusts. What good is a revolving loan fund targeting households earning at or below 80% AMI if you cannot pay it back? Thank you for your public service and attention to this critical home ownership program issue.
And many thanks for your input. Amber Cook?
Excellent. Hi.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, Chair Hall and members of the Housing Stability Council. My name is Amber Cook. I live at Milepost 5 in the Montville neighborhood of Portland, once an artist community, now unfortunately a crime-ridden slum. Residents have testified here. We testified here about a year after CDP took over the building to share how none of the promises that they made when they were able to take over ownership and got money from OHCS, none of the promises have been fulfilled. We were struggling with like lack of maintenance and lack of cleaning and repairs and being managed by a one-star criminally negligent property management, and our artist spaces have been given away, that kind of thing. We asked the council to reconsider giving CDP funding to acquire another low-income property, but without investigation that we could tell, they were given that permission and not censured in any way, while we caught them overcharging thousands of dollars of rent, exposing us to asbestos, reduced services, that kind of thing. In early 2021, residents testified here again, sharing how Milepost 5 had degraded into a slum with residents living in despair, how Milepost 5 was no longer an artist community in any way, with all our art being taken down, thrown away, our art spaces locked up, that kind of thing. We asked for help from OHCS in the intervening year and a half. The only assistance that we've received is the excise of one illegal lease writer that a resident discovered, and one building inspection that it took over a year to happen. The results of this inspection, a couple of connected downspouts and some mildewed wood in one kitchen, somehow completely missing the open hanging asbestos, melted walls, cracked pipes, ongoing water flooding, due to a leak in the roof that hasn't been repaired in 2 years, mold and unrepaired things in units, broken windows and exit doors that unfixed for months at a time, disgusting state of communal bathrooms that we pay for in our rents. Currently, Milepost 5 has crime documented by the police that includes nightly prostitution, meth labs in the building, heroin dealers, open drug dealing every day in plain sight, bike and car chop shops, never-ending squatting in unrented units, assault, burglary, open gun carrying, pistol whipping, people being beaten and even shot. So just considering how our lives have gone from, decent, thriving artist community to a total nightmare, under this California partnership ownership, living in, we literally have like ceilings will collapse, bits of ceilings will collapse on residents. We even have one right now in the lobby because of this flooding, right? This building is falling apart. And we're in danger pretty much every day from the squatters and the drug dealers, the people in getting their opioids and burning their meth in public places. Yes.
We are at about 3.5 minutes. So if
I'm
you could
so
wrap it up,
sorry.
please.
I will.
No problem.
Thank you so much for that heads up. So I just want to say that, when will we get help? When will there be oversight? When will someone come in and actually do, inspections of this place and help protect tenant rights? There are 100 renters living in these conditions, and I am dismayed to see no oversight and renter protections in OHCS's plan for 2023. We need it really badly. Building more low-income housing so that people are living in this kind of nightmare is really not a solution. And I would really ask for OHCS to consider what you can do to add into this plan to actually protect renters. Especially low-income renters. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Bell, I know this property has been a, long-term challenge. I wonder if staff maybe could touch base with the resident leaders and give them another opportunity for their concerns to be heard and for whatever kind of follow-up is possible and appropriate.
Without a doubt. So Ms. Cook, just appreciation for you being here and you elevating all of this. So just much appreciation for this. And I believe, Shaloa can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe we have Ms. Cook's contact information and we will be following up.
All right, great. Next on the public comment list, Margot Black.
Good morning, committee members and Chair Hall. Before I begin, I just need to ask, I have a resident sitting next to me who also wishes to present testimony, but she doesn't have her own Zoom access. So I just want to ask, can she testify right after me or raise hands, or do we need to do it another way?
She can testify right after you. That would be fine.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Okay, good morning, council members. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning. My name is Margot Black. I am a tenant organizer working with the residents of Woodspring Tenant Association. Woodspring Apartments is a 172 unit complex in Tigard, Oregon. It was built in 1991 as a low-income senior housing complex for 60% AMI. It represents roughly a fifth of Tigard's affordable housing inventory. On January 1st, 2021, the elderly and disabled widows and widowers of Woodspring received a letter from their property manager informing them that effective immediately, Woodspring would no longer be an affordable complex, and after a 3-year mandatory grace period, all rents would be moved to market rate. This news terrified the residents. How could this be fair or legal? In order to move in, they had to prove they couldn't afford market rents. So this letter was effectively an eviction notice, but most lacked the resources to be able to move out. Even for able-bodied families with resources, moving is expensive and a huge physical and logistical ordeal. And the reality is that most moved in believing it would be their last home, intending to age in place. Now, in the middle of an unprecedented and growing housing crisis, they are being forced to amass resources they don't have to find and move into affordable housing that doesn't exist. We should never allow these affordability restrictions to expire without robust policies in place to mitigate the devastating impacts of displacement. We can and must do better. In response to this letter from their management, the residents got together to discuss what could be done and formed Woodspring Tenants Association to try to save their housing and community. Their first action was to send a letter to the owners, Hamilton Zands, a private equity firm out of San Francisco, asking them to consider a policy that would grandfather the existing residents into affordable rents in order to allow them to age in place. Surprisingly, the CEO was responsive and willing to meet with residents and local leaders to explore options that would minimize displacement. In the last 2 legislative sessions, the legislature has earmarked an unprecedented amount of money toward affordable housing preservation, which now makes preserving Woodspring as affordable housing a realistic possibility. At present, Washington County Housing Authority is in conversations with the owners regarding purchasing the complex, and the owners have expressed a willingness to sell. This is truly excellent news and would be the best possible outcome. But time is also running out. Halfway through the 3-year grace period, it is our current understanding that while conversations between the owners and the county are in progress, everything hinges on being able to procure the necessary funding, which can't be explored until OHCS releases a NOFA for the preservation funds, which we've been told will happen early this fall. I'm testifying today primarily to call your attention to the plight of Woodspring and its residents, but also to ask that members of this committee leverage whatever power and influence they have to ensure that this NOFA is indeed released in the early fall and not delayed a moment longer. The uncertainty of the future is—
Excuse me, we're at 3.5 minutes, so if you could wrap up soon, please.
This is the last sentence. Sorry about that.
Okay.
The uncertainty of the future is causing profound distress for the vulnerable residents of Woodspring. Lives are hanging in the balance. Please take action. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your input. Director Bell, any response?
No response. I think we have a tenant that's set to testify, so I want to be able to hear from the tenant.
Okay. One more call for Erica Ledesma. Are there any members of the public online who haven't spoken but would like the opportunity? If so, please use the Zoom raise your hand function now.
Chair Hall, I have the resident next to me ready to—
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, I forgot about that.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead and yeah.
Okay,
please.
I'll do my very best to make it 3 minutes, okay? Good
All
morning,
right, thank
council
you.
members. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share my testimony with you today. My name is Lois Keck, and I'm the tenant spokesperson for Woodspring Tenant Association. 79 years old, and I have lived at Woodspring Apartments in Tigard for 19 years. Needless to say, I consider this to be my forever home. Living here has allowed me to age in place with this acceptance and grace, despite the low fixed incomes I and my neighbors subsist on. Over these many, many years, close relationships have developed which provide social interactions, activity opportunities, and physical and emotional support shared among this family-like community. This is why I can honestly, without exaggeration, express to you the incredible emotional, psychological, and financial stress that my neighbors and I are experiencing due to the decision by the property owners to allow the Section 42 program to expire. Our 3-year grace period is halfway over, and the uncertainty of our fate is becoming too much to bear. Many of my neighbors are unable or barely able to afford the 5% annual rent increases and do not have the resources to move, if we could even find another affordable place to live. And most of us don't have families who can physically, emotionally, or financially provide a safety net. Not only do we have a great community of neighbors, but we are also attached to the area we live in. Moving away would move us away from our doctors and other service providers on which we rely. We need your help. As Margot testified, we need OHCS to recognize the urgency of our situation and ensure that Washington County has the necessary resources in a timely manner to seal the deal to preserve our housing. But as a longtime resident of an affordable housing community, I also want to take a moment to ask you to take the lives and livelihoods of Section 42 residents into consideration when setting policy and ensuring compliance. When Hamilton Zants took over our complex in 2015, they removed computers from our community room, eliminated night and weekend hours, effectively ending organized community activities in our clubhouse. That had been going on for decades, but they still got their tax credits. When Woodspring Tenant Association wanted to put on a little garage sale in our carports to help our neighbors earn a little extra money, the owners threatened to evict anyone who participated. For years, we managed to survive on our very low incomes because our yearly rent increases were only $8 to $15. But the new owners are taking full advantage of OHCS's policy to exact 5% yearly rent increases without any justification. For many
Excuse
of
me,
us,
we're past 3 minutes, so if you could wrap up as soon as possible, please.
yes, sir, I was just one paragraph away, sir. Why do you allow this? Woodspring Tenant Association is counting on you to hear us. Take us seriously, and please, please take action. The stakes could not be higher for myself, my neighbors, and my community. Help us save our housing. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your input. And now Peter Hanley, Casa of Oregon, has his hand up. And so, Peter, if you're ready.
Good morning, Chair Hall, Director Bell, members of the council. I'm stepping in for Erika Ledesma from Coalición Fortaleza down in Southern Oregon. So thank you for this opportunity today. On your docket today are two projects down in Southern Oregon for your approval. One is specifically for farm workers. The other is the purchase of a mobile home park that we will be rebuilding that was primarily housing agricultural workers as well as Latinx population. I want to thank the staff for being very creative in the solutions that they came up with getting these projects onto your docket today. We encountered a number of problems along the way that at any moment could have derailed them, but we were able to come up with creative solutions to make them work. I was down in Southern Oregon on Monday meeting with fire survivors. The loss of home, community, the traumatization that they've been through was palpable. It's a long road to recovery, and I appreciate the department's work on recovery. And you'll also be talking about the Cdbg Recovery Action Plan today. And that plan is really geared towards restoring folks' lives in a way that will restore the homes. Maybe not necessarily the communities that they know, but I think some of us have commented on perhaps opportunities for channeling some of those funds to make sure that we're not just looking at the homes, but also look at it trying to restore the community. So I particularly want to thank Natasha and Ryan and their teams for coming forward with some real solutions to make some of this stuff happen. I also want to make one comment, and I will be a broken record on this. Community engagement. I know that the department is building up their community engagement efforts. I know that it's not something that's funded at the department in a way that we can make sure that those communities are able to engage back with their other community members and with OHCS. And CASA is moving forward anyway. We've been fundraising. We will be starting community engagement, not just for these two projects, but for a bigger community engagement effort within the community over the next 3 months. We've been in conversations with OHCS to see if we can get some funding separate from the Cdbgdr, because that's going to be a little ways down the road. But we're going to go ahead with those efforts because we know we've got to start giving folks some hope down there. They know projects are coming online, but we need to be able to show them something. So over the next 3 months, we'll be getting some of that done. So I want to thank the department and keep focusing on that equity work. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, as always. And Sheola, one last call if anyone else has raised their hand.
We do. We have a Miss Terrell Roper.
All right. Are you online and ready to speak?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Chair Hall and council members. I just wanted to piggyback on what Peter just said. I am down in Southern Oregon with So Ready, which is the Southern Oregon Regional Economic Development Agency, and we support Jackson and Josephine County for all economic growth and build. And this is one of the most impacted areas on an economic standpoint on commercial. We have petitioned and asked for a carve out of some of these funds if they are allowed. And I just want to preface that this the economic community down here, the businesses, the community, Phoenix talent, unincorporated Jackson County suffer tremendous loss. And I just wanted to point that out again. We have submitted it in writing. We have been part of the town halls, and we really appreciate your the opportunity to speak, the opportunity to get the word out on the need that is down here. And we really hope that there is some funding that will be allocated for our business community down here. Thank you, Chair Hall.
Thank you for your input. One more call, Chayola. Have we got anyone else online?
No, no hands are raised at this time.
All right, then we move along with our agenda. And again, thank you to everyone who provided verbal input. I also want to acknowledge that we have had a handful of other email messages objecting to the potential removal of homeownership from Lyft in the, oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner, Councilmember Lee.
Chair Hall, please finish. I was waiting for you to
Okay.
jump in after you.
Okay. Again, several folks with written objections to removing homeownership from Lyft in the agency request budget for the next biennium. And also want to call to your attention, Director Bell yesterday afternoon sent an email to all of us with further context and background on the Cdbgdr action plan that we'll be considering today. And finally, I want to note a couple of days ago, a hold message went out to all council members that we will be having a virtual meeting on June 17th, 11 to noon on the agency request budget. It's extremely important we get the highest council participation possible. And I'll be sending you a reminder about that early next week. Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Chair Hall. I know that we do not deliberate on public comment. However, I feel the need to comment. I just want to acknowledge and say some of the most painful public testimony I hear as a member of this council is when people who are living in unacceptable conditions come and as a last resort are trying to find someone who will listen, who will hear, who will respond. And I just want to acknowledge that there were human beings here and in the past who have come to speak to us about their lived experience, and we need to just take a moment and sit with that.
Indeed.
Having said that, I also want to acknowledge that this is an advisory council. We do not have any authority to take action to cause anything to happen other than to recommend advice. And I see this theme of people who have tried to speak to others who might have direct responsibility coming again as a last resort to the council. And I'm wondering, part of this is people need to be heard and their concerns and feedback needs to be documented, which I know staff do when this happens. I'm wondering about an ombudsperson position. I'm wondering about some place where people can go where we know that they're, in many ways, it's not OHCS's authority to be able to take action to remedy these specific conditions. And I want to be very clear about that. However, we do have the ability, and many of the speakers spoke to this today, to use other means of our authority to help incentivize or encourage the responsible parties to take action. And I would like us to have a conversation, and perhaps staff can bring this back later, about systemically, not in the individual situations that we've just been told about today, but systemically, what could be done to help document, manage, and take whatever action is actually possible. I want to be very clear that we're constrained here to be able to respond to some of these situations. It's concerning to all of us. And it's also very difficult to sit here, you know, month after month, year after year, to hear the situations, which I don't think we hear about until they get really, really bad. And it makes me wonder about the situations we don't hear about, because people don't have enough information to understand, you know, how they might advocate for themselves and so on and so forth. So I want to acknowledge the people who spoke today and all the people who have spoken to us in my tenure on the council, and to ask that we think about what are some structural systemic ways we could start to respond to an approach to this. And if it's happening, then it would be great to get a briefing from staff. And if there's room for some more thinking or some new ideas, let's do that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Lee. And we now move on to the report of the director. Director Bell.
Oh, I was unmuted. It always had to be somebody, and it was me this morning. Well, good morning, and thank you for that, Chair Hall, and certainly members of the council. It's good to be in virtual community again with you today. So I have quite a few comments, and so I will try to approach them with as much brevity as possible. So let me just start with a couple of things. So one, Councilmember Lee hit on it, but I think it is worth elevating, and certainly not barreling through the agenda without just acknowledging sometimes it can be daunting and difficult and stressful to come in front of a council of people that you don't know, and we're not in-person community together, and to elevate concerns. And I want to just acknowledge that. And for each of the people that we heard from today, just know from me as the executive director of this agency, we hear you. So I just want you to know that we fully hear and receive everything that you have to say, and acknowledge that it is not always an easy position or a comfortable place to come in front of what's ostensibly a group of strangers and elevate this. So on a couple of matters, we do have some specific follow-up that is absolutely warranted, and we want to be able to do that. Specifically to the comments on Wood Springs, there is some active work that the agency has been engaged in for quite some time. So just for transparency, we do have an open acquisition pool, which is non-competitive. And then also we have some rental assistance and services funding that we have received that will be allocated, that we've been actively working with the housing authorities in both Washington County and Salem on this. And I want to recognize that this is a larger systemic problem that we all have to be aware of, and that's in front of us. When we talk about affordable housing and access thereof, this is also about preservation and keeping things affordable as well. And so I want to just acknowledge that we have certainly some situations and some funding opportunities in front of us to help provide some alleviation. And this is where our system, this is where certainly the department is going to have to continue to be relentless and keep focused on really these long-term strategies. You know, we heard it, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but you know, even as my own family struggled to always keep up with being able to just, you know, keep the bills paid, that is an incredibly stressful place to be in every single day, day in and day out. And so I just want folks to know on a personal level, I get it. And so we have some specific follow-up that we will make sure that folks hear from us on, and I want to make sure that that's counted for the record. The second thing that I wanted to note is on Lyft homeownership. So it's not a specific item for the agenda today, and so I want to be brief in my comments, but I want to acknowledge our partners who have provided some constructive criticism and feedback, which we always need to continue to be open to hearing excuse me, on lift home ownership. So there's more conversation to come. This is not over. But what I want to say, this is primarily an 11Q bond issue, which I know not all the council members live in 11Q bond world all day, every day. But what I want to say is that on the topic of racial justice and not posturing as an agency that cares about racial justice, and that doesn't fully come through in the decisions that we make and how we program resources, we have no plans to let up at all on the production of homeownership and access to homeownership. So I just want to make sure our partners know that there is still more conversation to come, and your feedback, the constructive criticism that we received, is well received, and there will be more conversation on that. And we'll make sure that we make some space for this at the council to have some open public conversation about that. And then a couple more things are on the draft agency request budget. Chair Hall mentioned it, but we've been having some engagement and some conversations with, of course, with the council, but then also with a number of our partners and community members and leaders across the state around the agency's draft agency request budget. I want to call out a couple of things. Is one, we have a survey that is out right now that will be open through May. So for anybody at all that has feedback that they want to provide to the department, that is one of the avenues that you can do that. So if there's any feedback on, lift home ownership, really on anything, we want to make sure that folks know that that survey is there, it's available, and we want to hear everybody's feedback on that. Also, so on the topic of community engagement, because we've talked about it a lot, but we perhaps haven't talked about it structurally in terms of like what is shifting at the agency. And so if the council is interested in that, we'd be happy to talk about our plans, and we do have plans to increase capacity of community engagement, which would also include an ombuds position. So this is new and different for the agency. This is a shift. Over the last couple of years, as we have diversified how we are of service to the people of Oregon, all people of Oregon, we have found that there is a sort of right sizing or optimizing ourselves to be optimally accessible to the people that we serve. And so we'd be happy to bring that back in front of the council to talk through some of the dynamic changes and the evolutions that are happening at the agency that I, again, will flag for the council and for anybody listening. It is different than where we've been. And from my perspective, it's also exactly where we need to be. So I just want to elevate that, and we'd be happy to talk about that in front of, bring that back at a near date on that. And then last couple of things, Chair Hall, I promise, and then I will turn it back over to you so we can get into the guts of our agenda. We are, all of us, the collective, we are coming off of what I will say a couple of really, really hard weeks, really hard weeks on a personal level, as a nation, as a collective, where we are continuing to process in whatever way that we can process violence against children, violence against the Black community, which is on top of violence that has continued to take place against many of our Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. None of it makes sense. And this is not a cheesy, pump up locker room speech. But I acknowledge that for our collective consciousness, because we're processing as an agency and trying to continue to figure out where and how do we continue to use our positionality? How do we take all of that energy, that anger, that frustration, and pour that into something that is meaningful and positive and is representative of the community that we want to see in the world that we want to see, which sounds maybe really lofty as a housing finance agency. But we've been here before. Over the last couple of years, we've all been here before where we've heard about these horrific events, and it's difficult for a lot of communities to try to heal when trauma keeps happening over and over and over again. And so with all of that, I will just say for us and from my seat and as a collective body, this emboldens us to continue to show up for learning, for building our competency, and to really digging into what does allyship look like, active allyship look like, and how do we continue to hold on to hope? We know that, and maybe it's just me, we don't wake up with it every day. You've got to work hard to get it and work even harder to hold on to it every single day. And that is what we are trying to do as an agency, as a government agency, and we'll continue to do that. And I would also say it's the month of June, and we should also use this as an opportunity, as a call for celebration of our National Pride Month and Juneteenth, both which represent two promising, from our perspective, two promising light along oftentimes what has felt like dark pathways to securing human rights and equality and belonging, which is a simple word in concept and in practice is not always so linear. So I would just take that as we engage today, as we do our work in our respective areas, to elevate that this is National Pride and Juneteenth month, and hopefully we can find some hope and some solace on the really hard days in that. So with that, that will conclude my comments, and then I will turn it, Chair Hall, I'll turn it back over to you. I see a couple, or maybe just one hand raised.
Thank you, Director Bell, for those wise and perceptive words. Councilmember Sandoval.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, Director, if you could just clarify. So Councilmember Lee mentioned that we're an advisory council. And so can you just clarify whether we're an advisory council or we actually have decision-making authority, or is there a spectrum there? Just so that I'm clear about that.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chair Hall, Chair Hall and Councilmember Sandoval. So here's what I will say. So I think I've shared this with most of the council members, maybe I haven't, but so I have been working with the Department of Justice over the last couple of weeks to get something that clarifies in plain language what the council's roles mean, both from a statutory perspective and what that means in practice. Because we've heard words, I've heard words, policy advisory, certainly from an affordable rental housing perspective, when we think about the history of the council, there certainly is a fiduciary responsibility in terms of oversight of transactions. But I think, Councilmember Sandoval, just to be really clear with you, part of the reason why I think it's important for us now to take stock and really get clear, crystal clear about roles, is because the agency's work has diversified. We are not doing only what we were doing a few years ago. Even when I came onto the agency, the work has diversified, which means that the council members' role, we're going to have to continue to look at that and make sure that it is most up to date. And that on an individual level, council members, when we look at texts and words that describe the council's role, we all have the same meaning on that. So I did receive some feedback this week that I haven't had a moment to digest from the Department of Justice. And I think if amenable, Councilmember Sandoval, I'd be happy for us to engage and bring that back to this monthly meeting, just so that there's public transparency around that too, if that satisfies your request.
Yes, that would be great. Thank you, Director.
Okay, thank you all. And we move into our decision items and briefing items now. And as I'm sure you've all noticed on the council, this is a very packed schedule. However, we are going to aim for a noon adjournment with a 15-minute break at about 10:45 or so. So I believe Ryan Flynn, Assistant Director for Disaster Recovery and Resilience, will lead us through this next section.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Chair Hall, Director Bell, council members. Hope you've had a great week. Before we get into our normal schedule of what we were going to cover, I wanted to see if I could respond quickly to the comments we heard about disaster recovery and some items just a few minutes ago. So Peter, thank you for your thoughts. We really are glad and excited to propose Talent Mobile Estates as a transaction recommendation today to the council. We think it's a great project that's really going to make an impact on the Latina population's recovery in Jackson County. And also, we will continue to work with you and many other stakeholders to focus on an equitable and effective recovery, learning a lot with how our partners do their business to achieve that, and finding the best practices is what we will continue to do. And Terrell, I'm sorry I didn't catch your last name as you were speaking. Thank you for your comment. So in all transparency, the initial Cdbgdr action plan draft did not include economic revitalization as a element of what we would recommend here to the council for a piece of our program activities. We really are focused on housing recovery as the biggest piece of what we need to do. However, as we worked through our public engagement process, which we're going to cover today and how that went, we changed that as a direct result of engagement just like that, and have included economic revitalization as a piece of the eligible activities. So direct result from that kind of comment, from the comments we got from many others, economic revitalization is an allocation underneath the Cdbgdr program. So we're excited to have had that opportunity to engage and make pivots as we understood what the community needs really were, and listen to those comments. So moving on, today we have 3 voting items to recommend today. It is a pretty big meeting for us for this HSC, so we're excited and eager to go through a number of these items. And within this hour, we hope to get a lot done. So we're going to try to be condensed in how we get through our items to make sure we have time. Look forward to your questions and clarifications, and see if we can get to spots where we can recommend votes that you're confident in. So the first 2 that we're going to do right now are 2 transaction recommendations. These are state funded through House Bill 5006 state fund transaction recommendations that are local priorities that we've been working with our partners to identify these projects. And the second one, of course, we'll move to the Cdbgdr action plan, cover the content within it, and ask for a motion to endorse that action plan. So the first one is a Mill City land acquisition transaction for future use as housing for wildfire survivors. The second one is an affordable housing transaction. We just kind of talked about it with CASA at Talent Mobile Estates, a project again that's going to focus on Latina family housing. So both projects are priorities for communities that we're working with that were affected by the 2020 wildfires. So to get us started, we actually have Marion County Commissioner Bethel here with us to share her thoughts and her perspectives on the importance of the Mill City transaction and to give her perspective on that. So Commissioner, I will turn it over to you if you have, yep, there we go. So please take it away.
Hello, thank you, Ryan. It's nice to see all of you. Mary, it's nice to see you again. I hope to meet you in person someday. For the record, I'm Danielle Bethel, Marion County Commissioner, and I am just really grateful to be here today to be able to present this idea to you all. I have only been a commissioner for a short time, 1.5 years. I campaigned in 2020 and was very active during the wildfire, in fact, a victim of that. And like some of the folks on public comment, I apologize in advance for my emotion because this is a really hard time in life. And I have been working on this project since the day I was sworn in, January 4th of 2021. So to be here to say to all of you, please help us is a big monumental task I feel like we are completing. So I am here simply to ask for your consideration to request a funding of $1.7 million to acquire 15 acres in Mill City. Possibly, if you've seen in your packet today, Marion County has had the opportunity to purchase 3 parcels of land that are adjacent to an approximate area in Mill City that's within the urban growth boundary. Currently, it's under some expansion. The community is for sewer services, and some of you may have heard about that if you've watched any of the legislative hearings in the last few months, but frankly, the last year. Nonetheless, I have a couple of key considerations for you. The land that I'm asking for is the largest swath of land available in the Santiam Canyon that was affected by the 2020 wildfires. It meets all of the local and county priorities. And in fact, it meets the statewide goal of housing recovery if we're able to purchase this land and move forward in the next steps. The site has the potential to establish a mix of 2 to 4 bedroom single family homes, specifically for wildfire survivors, seniors, and workforce housing, which would accommodate up to 70 to 75 units, which is in addition to the 54 units of multifamily housing that's scheduled neighboring this property through an awarded LIFT project earlier last year. The site, it provides permanent, stable housing to the wildfire survivors. And if you don't know, Marion County lost over 700 single-family independent units across 3 communities and in a very large unincorporated area of our community. As I said, the project complements a LIFT program, which has housing going in Staten as well as Mill City, and it provides an opportunity for different types of housing. If you've not had the opportunity to drive up the Santiam Canyon and see the terrain, I would highly encourage you to do so. Maybe you did on a drive to Bend previous to the fire and haven't had the opportunity since. And if you haven't, I would say prepare yourself because it is a drastic difference in scenery. And you can still see the devastation as you drive along Highway 22, where multiple homes are just bare, empty lots with burned, shrubs around them. Our largest challenge right now in recovery in Marion County for our canyon is rental housing. We have had a significant number of independent lots that were previously rentals be sold to individuals who are using them as secondary homes, which is great for tourism, I suppose, but it is awful for the people who want to go home. Generations of families are still living in manufactured homes elsewhere, states across the country, hotels, RVs, other things. And we have to fix this. And Marion County does not have the money to do this on our own. I have worked diligently with the legislature, my partners, through all community-based organizations, the local level, and of course, state agencies such as Oregon Housing and Community Services to create ideas that make sense, that accommodate the need that we have. And frankly, we can't do this without Oregon Housing and Community Services. We cannot do this without Ryan and his team. I meet with him regularly. I'm so grateful to whoever decided to hire him because he has been the biggest gem to this project. I met him in January, and I'm sure he is so sad that somebody gave me his cell phone number because I utilize it regularly. But I have to say, we have a plan for this land. We want to make sure affordable housing can exist forever in the canyon. So this $1.7 million is not just going to purchase land. It's going to give us the opportunity to create affordable, long-term housing that works for this community. And with Cdbgdr dollars in the future, we'll be able to, if awarded our project ask, build down the cost of this housing so it's affordable for owner-occupied housing, not rental housing. And I have a really good plan for that. I'm very familiar with Cdbg. Marion County is an entitlement county. And we last year, just as a sidebar, allocated $1 million to a CBO here to work towards down payment assistance because we believe owner-occupied housing is the way to go. And we want people to have a space of their own. And currently we're navigating over 300 households who don't have even a space to call home. And we need to get there. So I'm here to answer any questions if you have, but I'm really grateful for the opportunity to present to you today. And hopefully you will say yes, so we can move ahead. And just as a short note, I only have until June 28th to hear this yes. We've had this land on contract for a year, and that contract expires on the 28th. And if we don't get it, it just goes away. And then we will lose the largest opportunity available for our recovery. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any questions from any of the council? All right, really appreciate your input.
Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate that. And so the next section here, we're going to turn to our development project manager with the disaster recovery team, John Wright, who's going to walk through the funding, the details of that project. And then as well, we'll turn to Talon Mobile Estates, and we'll be asking for a motion to endorse on both. So John, I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning, Chairman Hall, council members, and Director Bell. And Commissioner Bethel, thank you for doing my job for me and presenting. I could not have said it any better on this project. It is absolutely a privilege for me to be able to be a part of disaster relief and resiliency and working with Ryan and working with these projects. They are close to me because I do have a heart for Oregonians and for those who have suffered housing loss through the fires, as well as our other strategic planning that we do with affordability and DEI. And so it's a pleasure of mine to be a part of this team. With that in mind, I would like to show you a picture, if I can figure out how to share on this again. There we go. So here are the 3 parcels that they're looking to purchase. There's a 3.35 acre parcel, then a 9.42 acre, and then a 1.59 acre parcel. Now you'll notice that these parcels are also around an existing lift project. So this housing actually will complement what we're already doing in Mill City around this lift project. I believe it also is a way of showing just how dedicated this agency is at making affordable housing available, and a preference of ours to be of help to our citizens in Oregon. I'd also like to say about this, as well as the loss. You can see what would happen if this goes to market rate. If we're not able to fund this project, you can almost guarantee that a developer will come in, swoop in, grab this property, and then probably go to market rate. Developmental land is very hard to get nowadays, and it is extremely difficult. And we have the opportunity to make a difference in a lot of lives, to put a mix of 2 to 3 bedroom single family dwellings in these properties. So basically what they've come in and asked for, and what we've come up with, is a grant of $1,706,500 for the purchase of this land, with the intent that restrictive covenants will be put on it for affordability, and that this will tie into their works to want to come back in for more funding later for development of this property. And then again, just like I said, they're looking at a mix of doing 2 to 4 bedroom single family homes that will support wildfire survivors, seniors, and workforce housing. Through this, they will meet how we're trying to align with state housing plan through the wildfire disaster recovery, through serving rural communities. With the projects moving forward that will come from this land, they'll be able to help in our statewide housing plan when it comes to DEI. And so with that, if you have any questions, please let me know. And again, I would like to personally recommend this project to Housing Council for funding.
All right, shall we take up the voting on each of these individually? I will ask if any council members have any questions or comments on acquisition of this property in Mill City. All right, hearing none, I would sure appreciate a motion.
I will make that motion.
Okay. We've got a motion from Councilmember DeFontorum to approve the acquisition, and I believe a second from Commissioner Higginbotham. Any further discussion? Hearing none, let's have a roll call, please.
Thank you, council members. Councilmember DeFontorum.
Yes.
Councilmember Farrell.
Yes.
Chair Hall.
Yes.
Councilmember Higginbotham.
Yes.
Councilmember Lee.
Yes.
Councilmember Mena.
Most definitely, yes.
Councilmember Sandoval.
Yes.
Thank you, council members. Motion passes. Congratulations.
Congratulations to all the good folks who have worked to make this possible. And it's very clear that this property will have an opportunity to go a long way toward meeting the housing needs created by the terrible wildfire of 2020. On to Talent Mobile Estates, I believe.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for all of that. Moving on, the Talent Mobile Estates, again, this is a slightly different project, and we'll walk through the details, but very excited to bring it up. It does really focus on, as I said earlier, ag worker Latina recovery, and that's going to be a big piece of this project. So without any further talking to save time, I'll turn it over back to John to walk through the funding details. So John, please take it away. And John, you're muted.
Director Bell, you're not the only one that has the problem of being on mute. I apologize for that. Also, I apologize ahead of time if you're having a hard time hearing me. I'm still recovering from, like many Americans who had gotten COVID, and the long-term effects sometimes don't want to go away as fast. So it has affected my voice, so I apologize for the raspiness of it. But as you can see a picture, this is Talent Mobile Estates. This is only a portion of the property of what they are wanting to purchase and develop on. As you can tell, work has already been done. It's not completed, but it is in the works of being completed. And basically, it is an 89 space manufactured dwelling park that was destroyed completely, except for 10 units in the 2020 Alameda fire in Jackson County. I have personally went and walked the site, and I saw photos of the devastation before this work was done, and then looking at the great work that was done to bring this community back to life. It was heart-wrenching to go through the community and see all the devastation, all the housing that was lost, but it did my heart good when going back through it to see everywhere you turned around, no matter where you went, housing being redeveloped to bring this community back to life, as it was hit extremely hard. I'm glad that Peter has joined with us today, working with him and Rose and Casa on this project. Again, it's been a pleasure. We had some challenges, some funding challenges. Funding they thought that they could apply for and get, and then all of a sudden found it didn't qualify. So it was a challenge to put a package together, but we worked hard and diligently together as partners to come up with a workable solution to allow a project like this to move forward with your blessing and approval. What we're asking for is $7.5 million for a zero interest bridge loan. We would like to provide them a bridge loan for the acquisition of the property. This will allow them to acquire the property as you see it now, and also allow them some funds in the meantime to continue the operation moving forward until the second phase can kick in, and then they can actually start doing more of the remainder of the development and getting units in. We are planning on helping them with manufactured units, about 79 units out of the 89. That will come at a later date as we get closer to it, and as we know more details on phase 2 and on the housing. In the meantime, we will be putting some restrictions during the time of the loan. Those restrictions will only be there while the loan is in place. Once the loan has been paid back, the restrictions will go away. However, the intent of the project is to come back, and then where we will put permanent restrictions on it with the additional funding and the additional housing. And I'm not sure if Peter is still on, but Peter will be able to answer some more questions if you need more answered. I will say that, again, the community was hit really hard, but fortunately this will help in multiple ways. It will help do what CASA does best, and that is bring a community together and make it resident owned. It gives them the ability to be homeowners. It gives them the ability to control their own destiny as a community, as they will come together and to become a co-op in the ownership and the working of this property and of the units. So it will align with our state housing plan in regards to home ownership. Through CASA's network, they will be partnering with, and I apologize, I cannot for the life of me say the name of this partner. It's the Coalizio Fortaleza. I apologize for Southern boy, that's easy to trip over my tongue on. But they will be, through a partnership with them, it will help keeping with our equity and racial justice that we shoot for within our housing plans, as well as rural communities. And this again will be impacting seniors. It'll also be impacting our workforce housing that is there, our Latina families and community. And with that, I would again request the council to approve the $7.5 million in bridge loan for the phase 1 site acquisition of Talent Mobile Estates.
All right, let's open it up to comments or questions from the commission. Councilmember Sandoval.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. So I'm really pleased to hear about this project. I've been spending a lot of time down in Southern Oregon, and also through the work I've done through the housing agency and the public hearing that we'll talk about later. But yeah, the Latin American community has been extremely disproportionately hit, and this is like the perfect type of project that I think is needed. Strong community ties, resident owned, and so yeah, I'm just really want to publicly acknowledge that, and I hope we can support this project.
Now I'm having trouble with that sticky mute button. Councilmember Farrell.
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with that sentiment. As a lifelong Southern Oregonian, projects like this that put, a sense of self-determination and ownership. It's an empowerment strategy to help build resilience in a community that was really, really devastated. So I'm just super glad and happy to support projects like this. I'm glad to see it happening.
Mr. Wright. You are muted. Excuse me, we can't hear you. You're muted.
Yeah, it's a sticky little button. I agree with you. You push on it, doesn't want to behave. There's one piece that I did forget, and it is extremely important in all of this discussion, is that we're building to resiliency. So it's not just we're going to buy some homes and put them on the land. the land, everything about this project is going to be building to resiliency. Because let's be honest, disasters are going to happen, and the best that we can help to mitigate these issues is going to help the state and the people of Oregon in the long run. And so just understand that even the units that we'll be looking at for this project will be built to some resiliency standards to resist disasters like fire, rain, that type of thing. So we will still remain in partnership with CASA over this project.
Thank you for that. Any further council input now? Not, I would certainly entertain a motion.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. And could we have a roll call, please?
Thank you, council members. Councilmember DeFontorum.
Yes.
Councilmember Farrell.
Yes.
Chair Hall.
Yes.
Councilmember Higginbotham.
Yes.
Councilmember Lee.
Yes.
Councilmember Mena.
Yes.
Councilmember Sandoval.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Congratulations to all. And now we're going to hear about the draft Cdbg Disaster Recovery Action Plan.
Indeed. Thank you, Chair Hall. So yes, moving on to our main topic for today, not that the other two were not important. This is definitely the one we've been building towards. So we're going to turn to the Cdbgdr action plan. I'd like to say this moment is really the culmination of 6 months of work, not just from me, but from many, many people, including a lot of the people on the council and in the room today. I've actually, just for a little bit of context, been part of multiple other state action plans and read many, many others. I might be a little bit biased, but I believe this is the strongest one that I've ever seen. A couple of things I'd like to highlight before we get to the presentation. This plan prioritizes housing recovery. I think that'll be pretty clear when we show you the allocation for your consideration. We see that that's the most critical unmet need. Public engagement certainly confirmed that for us. And we know that the costs for redeveloping in a lot of very different and disparate areas, from Jackson County to Lincoln County, are going to be very high for us to be able to bring back developments and bring housing to those developments. Within housing, you'll see we're going to do everything possible to prioritize co-op models. We think that that is a really good model. And so a lot of our projects in the future are going to focus on any opportunity to make that happen. And the other big piece I want to highlight within housing is that we want to help as many people who were renters at the time of the disaster become homeowners, and furthermore become homeowners in parks that have a co-op model. So that's a big piece of our belief, and we definitely heard that confirmed back to us in our public engagement. The plan emphasizes specific strategies to ensure an equitable recovery. And I'm going to go through those key tenets of that on slide 2 of what we're going to bring up in a moment. This plan has been developed in partnership with many organizations, with partners, with survivors themselves, with community organizations, and with recovery leaders. And I'll also say the draft plan, what we initially started with, changed significantly as a result of that public engagement. Like we mentioned one already, the addition of economic revitalization as an activity would just be one example, but we've seen a lot of changes as we engage with the public. And of course, as we've talked about pillars before, it will emphasize resilience in all of our activities so that we're more climate adaptive and responsive, more energy efficient, and more resilient to future disasters. At this point, there were a couple of folks who had volunteered to say a couple of things, and I think the best time is now to get their thoughts before we dive into our presentation, and then that will kind of drive towards the voting item. We have two council members, Sandoval and Councilmember Farrell, who wanted to say a couple of things about their experience in public engagement. And we also have Devin Thompson with us, who is the McKenzie Valley Long-Term Recovery Executive Director, who wanted to say a couple of things. So if this is a good time, Councilmember Sandoval, I would ask you to see if you had a few thoughts that you would like to share before we start the presentation.
Actually, since Councilmember Farrell is a resident there, I'd actually like to turn to her first.
Well, yeah, there's so much that could be said, but in this interest of our super packed agenda today, I think I'll just, state what I've already heard today, which was on my mind. And so it makes a lot of sense to me that there's still a lot of very real and very raw trauma and emotion for people who are impacted by the wildfire in Southern Oregon. Whether it was lost businesses, lost homes, even lost rentals, people lost autonomy. And then in a crisis, you become dependent on systems. And when systems go differently than anticipated, that creates frustration. And so I heard that in the voices, and I would say it was a small number of individuals who spoke at the town hall recently, but they did a very eloquent job of representing, I think, the many people who would identify with some of that loss and frustration. And I also still heard hope, and that is something I always listen for. And so what I really think is true for these individuals having lost that sort of sense of autonomy is that, what helps foster resilience is self-empowerment. And I think what I was hearing is, we need resources that work for us in the way that we need them most, and without a lot of bureaucracy. And so I just really want to acknowledge that I think OHCS has done a lot of really great work to expedite resources and try to address immediate needs. Can't really speak to the efforts of FEMA. I know that it's an unrelated but related conversation. But we still have a lot of people down here in Southern Oregon who are hurting. And so I'm just really excited that this particular opportunity might provide a meaningful way to address some of that and create some hope.
Thank you, Councilmember Farrell. Did you want to weigh in now, Councilmember Sandoval?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I was given the opportunity to participate in the public hearing that was focused on the Spanish-speaking population. And I was really impressed by it. I was impressed by the number of attendees. I counted about 60. I think there's probably more than that, actually, because people were coming and going. And I think that part was successful because the agency relied on some, the community-based organizations that have a lot of respect in that community. And so that was really good to see the turnout, but also, and actually Pam Marsh, she made this comment that she afterwards, that she felt like the space was a really secure and safe space for this population to let their ideas be heard, and I agree with her. I think it was very safe space to hear their stories. We had the opportunity to hear some really difficult stories, just heartbreaking stories of the ordeals that people went through. But we also heard some very specific recommendations on how we could improve the action plan. And so, one of them was that we should focus on economic development, but specifically on providing resources to small businesses, because there were a lot of small businesses, and sometimes these businesses are kind of under the radar businesses, if they're owned by Latin American owners. They're really small businesses, and they got affected by the fires. That was a key thing. And the other thing I heard was really about how they want access to these funds, and they want kind of low barriers, right? And I think that's going to be key as we kind of move forward with this. Is we really have to figure out, especially if we're focusing on the racial justice aspects of this, is how is this going to be implemented, right? And how are we actually going to outreach to this population so that it's easy for them to apply? And how do we make it as flexible, the process as flexible as possible, so that they actually get some of this funding? So I think that overall, where I try to look at the entire program, and you'll hear more about it, but from this racial equity lens, and I think really where that's going to come in is going to be in the application, right? Of when we start operationalizing like the details of how we're actually going to implement the project. So I just want to thank the staff. I think they did a wonderful job. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Higginbotham.
Yes, thank you, Chair Hall. I just wanted to say, first of all, I think this is an awesome opportunity, and I appreciate everybody's work in this project. I want to talk a little bit about the 5% administrative fee, and just want to put out there that, and I don't know how this CDBG project will relate to other CDBG projects. In my organization, we run multiple CDBG projects at a time. And I just want to throw out there that 5% admin, the way it's written, it says, that OHCS will have the opportunity to reallocate funds from admin to program if needed. And I suspect maybe the opposite may need to happen. 5% may not be enough to administer these types of funds. If they're totally different than residential rehabilitation and some of the other programs that I've worked with, that would be awesome. But they have been some of them can be overly administratively a burden. So just want to throw that out there.
Chair Hall, if I could actually just respond to Councilmember Higginbotham.
Go ahead, please.
Perfect, thank you. I really appreciate that comment, because I absolutely agree that these are administratively burdensome. And so, and I'd love to have this detailed conversation later. I don't want to take all of our time, but there's 5% admin is really for administrative activities that benefit the whole grant. So that's really like, our project oversight and management staff time, as well as our financial accounting services and central services work on administration of the grant. It's grant administration. Built into the allocations of housing programs or infrastructure or economic revitalization is what HUD would term project administrative costs or project delivery costs, in which you can really use, as long as as long as the activity is directly advancing like a survivor's benefit moving forward, then costs to use that as staff costs, as long, again, as it's proving that we're moving somebody forward through the project, is part of that allocation, which again is part of why you'll see that something like a housing allocation is really high, because we know to actually accomplish that, there's a lot of infrastructure, staff kind of infrastructure built in and time to actually accomplish that. So I'd be more than happy to go into that more with you, but I really appreciate that comment.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. That helps me.
All right, at this point, do you have more in the presentation, or are we ready for council discussion and vote?
Oh, no, we have quite a bit more.
Oh, okay. I thought so,
that,
but I just wanted to thank you.
That Devin Thompson has a chance to share his thoughts as well before we get to the scheduled presentation.
Thank you, Ryan, and I'll keep it really brief. I'm Devin Thompson, and I take this like everyone else. It's hard. I'm third generation McKenzie. My grandkids are now fifth generation McKenzie. We lost 464 dwellings and over 50 businesses. And I really want to stop and thank you guys for taking the time to meet with the community. The community really appreciated it. And that was the feedback we got. Because from a lot of government agencies, there's really a lack of transparency, and you're really transparent with the community. You would tell them yes, no, or we'll get back to you with your suggestions. And we really want to thank you for that. The other thing we want to recognize is $422 million sounds like a lot of money, but it really is not that much money when you're looking at, 8 counties. In the McKenzie corridor alone, we had 5 communities, all unincorporated, impacted by the fire. And when you stop and think about how do you help all these individuals and everybody else in Oregon that was devastated in the 2020 wildfires, you guys have a really hard job deciding how will these funds, my apologies for that, how these funds will be distributed. And when we started talking about it briefly yesterday, and you were sharing just kind of how even the $42 million would be distributed, it was like, wow, here in the McKenzie Valley, we're grateful for anything that you guys can do to help during the recovery effort. So thank you.
Thank you, Devin. And Chair Hall will bring up a presentation here and get to some content for you to describe. So I think Alex, you might be able to bring up the PowerPoint now, and Alex Campbell and Chelsea Cattle will be helping me with some content for you to describe where we're at with this action plan recommendation. So we feel it's always really good to just set with a little bit of a ground framing of what the allocation is. I'm going to move pretty quickly through this because I think everybody has heard this before. So the overall amount, $422.3 million. This is from HUD. It's called Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery, or Cdbgdr. It is specific to 2020 wildfire recovery. There are most impacted and distressed counties as defined by HUD. Those are Clackamas, Douglas, Jackson, Klamath, Lane, Lincoln, Lynn, and Marion counties. And our requirement is to spend 80% of the overall grant to benefit those most impacted areas. You're going to see on a couple of slides, our allocation focuses on, as I said, housing, infrastructure, and economic revitalization. And we're going to define what those all mean. And of course, we would really love to have questions to clarify anything that we're not clear about. 70% of the overall grant must benefit low to moderate income households. That's defined as anyone earning 80% or less of the area median income per HUD's calculation. 15% of the overall grant must go towards mitigation activities, but what we're also going to tell you is that we plan to go way beyond 15% in a big piece by saying any house that we develop for a survivor, we want to see that house itself have higher standards than would be sort of the standard, home build per code. We want to see higher energy efficiency and resilience, set aside setbacks, anything that we're able to work with partners to determine the best ways to strategize around mitigation. And the last thing here is, this is the first action plan. Most grantees, they go through 20 or 30 amendments to that action plan. So we're going to be busy for years coming to you for substantial amendments. That would be reallocations, new programs, refinements to programs. This is our best possible effort today, but we will always be refining as we learn more. If we could move to the next slide. So right off the bat here, I want to talk about our approaches to equity and racial justice in the plan. This, of course, this is one of our 2 primary pillars, and a key focus for us to make sure that this is a key, a core component of this action plan. And I think as you'll review it and read it, I believe that you'll see that in the action plan. We have adopted targeted universalism, as we covered previously at some point, as an overarching policy imperative for every activity within the action plan. And what we want to do is make sure that we're looping back all activities and program implementation to those targeted universalism framework. And so today, what I'd like to cover is our first universal goal within targeted universalism. We expect to have more, and those will be brought to you for consideration as well. But the first one here is that fire impacted individuals and households will have equitable access to the resources necessary to be housed safely, sustainably, permanently, affordably, and in their housing of choice. We believe that that does cover a lot of ground. We really would love refinements and conversation with you to add more universal goals and refine this one. And all of those will be reflected in our action plans themselves as, again, as policy imperatives. We have about 5 key strategies that I'd like to cover here of how we're going to implement ERJ in our programs. Okay, so the first one is that we will fund, as in form grant agreements and give parts of the Cdbgdr money allocations to culturally specific organizations to partner with them. A lot of these organizations have already been doing recovery than anyone on my team has been. And so we do not anticipate to reinvent any wheels. There's a lot of really important relationships built between the CSOs and the disaster survivors. We want to fund them to continue their work and to help us ensure that our programs meet people where they are and really are able to be a big piece of how we're going to do equitable recovery. So we'll have multiple partnerships with CSOs, in particular, of course, in Southern Oregon, Jackson County area, to make sure that the Latina recovery is successful. We don't believe we would be successful in that if we did not have those partnerships. The second one is we plan to do a phased approach to application processing and application periods. So what I mean by phased approaches is we're going to start with the most vulnerable populations, which is a HUD term for BIPOC or Latina populations, as well as lower income populations, to make sure that we and disabled or elderly populations, to make sure that the people who need it the most get the first ability for us to actually receive their application and help them get through the process. To be pretty straightforward with the council here, in past recoveries I've been a part of, it's a pretty typical thing to see that if we open it up broadly and start working on all applications at the same time, honestly, the higher income populations who have applied tend to advance faster for a host of reasons. And so what we really want to do is focus and make sure that that doesn't happen in this recovery. And we really work with those people who need it the most again. Tracking. We're going to have a robust system that will be used to report to you on our success in meeting goals for our ERJ goals that we will probably develop and work over time. And we'll be able to report to you on how many Latina folks are benefiting from the program, how many BIPOC folks are benefiting from the program, and then be able to say, all right, well, that as compared to the unmet need and the impact of the fires, how are we doing? Do we need to do better over here to meet those goals? Or are we exceeding them? Hopefully we're going to be exceeding them, and we'll be able to show that data in pretty good detail to you over time as we do briefings about the rollout. Required practices. So what that means is we're going to be executing a lot of grant agreements with partners, with developers. And within those grant agreements, we are going to develop binding requirements for those partners to engage in ERJ-focused practices, reporting, outreach, maybe phased application approaches as well, so that it's not just a policy statement, but it would be in a binding legal grant agreement. And so those will be a piece of every single grant agreement that we execute. And then finally, policy decisions are going to focus and center the Latine BIPOC populations, as my colleague Chelsea Bunch says a lot to me. If we're able to center and the programs work for that group, it's gonna work for everybody else as well. So we are going to, as Professor Sandoval said earlier, there are gonna be no citizenship or residency requirements to benefit from these programs. That is not a HUD requirement. I've dealt with this before. We should not have any pushback from HUD on that. It is, of course, dependent on HUD approval, but I've had some time to really believe we'll have no challenges on that. And this is absolutely the way that we're going to approach this. We don't want to exclude anyone who needs this help from the start. We're going to prioritize, we kind of covered this, ownership whenever possible, though, of course, housing of choice, which is part of our universal goal, is a big piece of it. So if people don't want to become homeowners, it's not going to make them become homeowners. But nevertheless, as we've heard from a lot of people, as we believe as an agency and as a disaster recovery team, helping people move from rentership to homeownership and having equity is a really big piece of wealth building and security, and a really good policy to focus on in this opportunity and with this funding. And again, we already talked about this, but we will fund co-ops or other ownership models as often as possible. Frankly, would look to minimize private developers and maximize nonprofits or housing authority partners to make sure that we have long-term affordability periods, co-op models, other ownership models, because we believe, again, that really is a great policy to focus on, especially from the equity perspective. So those are kind of, that's the brief on. You'll see all of this in the action plan as we talk about our programs in the action plan. We cover those key strategies. So I will move on and turn it over to Alex Campbell, who's going to just briefly go over our public engagement efforts over the last couple of months. So Alex.
Thanks, Ryan. Chair Hall, members of the council. Glad to have this opportunity. We shared with you a little bit of our plan a few months ago, so I'm glad to report that we've been able to execute on it largely. I think maybe just about all the things that we included that we said that we would do, we have done. We did a voluntary sort of early phase of engagement to inform the writing of the plan even before we moved into the public comment period. So we met with a couple dozen local groups, local governments. We had several focus group discussions with fire survivors, some of those done in partnership with Unite and Jackson County. We had over 300 responses to a survey. On May 2nd, we published the draft action plan and moved into the 30-day comment period. We did 5 in-person public hearings. We had almost 200 folks come out to those hearings. We also accepted comment and provided information online. So we accepted comment by phone, by email. We extended as many different sort of avenues that we could to accept comment. We got a lot of comments in Spanish online and in person. We did additional briefings with groups like the Link group in Jackson County, with philanthropy stakeholders, and continue to do some more focus groups in partnership with OHDC and Unite, where we compensated fire survivors to come and share with us their thoughts and their opinions. We received over 170 formal comments that we'll be responding to individually as part of the published action plan, and Chelsea's going to talk a little bit more about the substance of those. We also engaged an ad hoc committee, as we mentioned to you all, our plan a couple months ago. And I think that's been a really beneficial body. Professor Sandoval and Mary Lee have participated with that group. We've also pulled in Devin Thompson, who you heard from earlier. Chelsea Bunch participated with that. We've had also representative from county commissioners in the impacted communities and mayor of Talent. But that group has really worked with us closely. I think probably the most important input we got from them was an insistence that we do 2 separate public hearings in Jackson County, one in English and one in Spanish. And I think that was a really successful model. So I think the last thing I should mention is you see this, this logo, Re-Oregon. In the future, you will hear us speak about this program more and more as Re-Oregon. We think that's a plainer way to speak than Cdbgdr. And we're calling it Re-Oregon because we are going to be focusing on recovering, rebuilding, and revitalizing these communities. And we also like that logo because it translates really well. There are a lot of words in Spanish that mean equivalent things. So with that, I'll pass it over to Chelsea to talk more about the substance of the comments and how we've responded to those.
Thank you, Alex. Good morning, Chair Hall, council members, and Executive Director Bell. For the record, my name is Chelsea Caddo. I'm the Chief Policy Officer for Disaster Recovery and Resilience. So you've heard a lot about the public comment period and the feedback, and we wanted to go over some of the common themes that came out of that, as well as how we're addressing those in the plan revisions. So the first is, which you've heard today as well, broad support for robust housing recovery programs. You'll see in the next couple slides, when we look at the budget allocation, that really a significant amount of the funding is going towards housing because above all, this was a housing disaster that really exacerbated our dire housing situation before the wildfires. So one thing we're doing, we've done since the first round of the draft plan that went out for public comment, is increasing our intermediate housing assistance program bucket funding by $3 million. We know that there will be a need for rental assistance and other supportive services for the participants that are moving into the permanent housing through our other programs. Another common theme we heard was concern about households that are above that LMI definition. So that's households above the 80% area median income, and that they still need recovery support. So, what we've done is said that, Ryan, Assistant Director Flynn talked a little bit about the phasing approach. Phase 1 will focus on those LMI households. It doesn't mean that households above LMI are not eligible, but they will be addressed in our phase 2 to ensure that we are able to meet the needs of those LMI households that might face a more challenging and more challenges as they recover. And then the other thing we want to do to respond to that is we will be submitting a waiver request to HUD and asking them if we can instead of using the area median income calculation, use statewide median income calculation. In 7 of the 8 counties, that statewide calculation is actually higher than the area median income. And so we can expand that eligibility a little bit more. One county, Clackamas, is actually above that statewide calculation, so they could continue using their area median income. Third, there was a lot of concern that reimbursement is not currently an eligible activity. Really one of the tenets of this is to prioritize funding to assist survivors who have not yet completed their recovery. So right now, we are not including reimbursement as an eligible use. However, Assistant Director Flynn talked about the substantial action plan amendments. We can do those later, and we are more than willing to look at that as we kind of get more information on the ground as to how programs are going and how households are moving through the process. We can certainly go back and add that in later as a substantial amendment. Alex, can you next slide, please? We heard from a lot of communities that there's challenges securing buildable land to support the programs that we're proposing, the Homeownership Opportunities Program in particular. And you heard earlier that we're using existing resources to acquire land, do some land acquisition, land banking, making that a priority use of the funding so that we can hold that land and have it available when we implement these programs. And then we heard concerns from community members in Jackson and Lane counties that economic revitalization wasn't included. You've heard again that we have now made some revisions to the action plan. We originally had proposed the disaster resilience infrastructure program that has now become the planning, infrastructure, and economic revitalization program. We've increased that bucket of funding by $2 million. And then we're proposing to do direct grant allocations to the impacted counties so that they can have more local control of that funding, and encouraging them to work, as a community to prioritize the projects that they want funded with those direct allocations. Next slide, please. So this is the proposed program budget. We'll go over, and I know we're already over time, so I'm going to try to go fairly quickly, but also, of course, any questions you have. I see, yes.
Let me just jump in here just for a second, because I know we're already over time. We have so much that we'd love to talk about, but my thought would be that we kind of end-ish on this slide and do brief descriptions of what each of these programs are, because in your packet, there's a description of each one of these programs that follows, but I think we'll be able to, Chelsea, just kind of talk about what each does here, and maybe kind of then we can turn to questions, and then we can probably turn to the endorsement. So does that work for you?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
So you can, I don't really have to go into a lot of explanation. As you see, we've got over 80% of the budget is going towards those housing programs. I'm gonna look at my notes for each program. So the HEART program is the Homeowner Assistance and Reconstruction Program. That is for homeowners that have not yet begun their reconstruction or the replacement of homes. We've got also programming for homeowners that have begun their reconstruction and replacement. We would look at doing reimbursement of costs going forward and providing construction advisory services for those folks that want to continue on with their, managing their recovery. I'll mention that for those that have not yet begun construction, we're looking at doing a direct management of that construction. And then, as I mentioned, right now we don't have reimbursement for homeowners that have completed their reconstruction, but that is something that we can look at later. That program includes a $4 million pilot for accessory dwelling units to the extent possible, where we're helping folks rebuild their housing. If it works and they're interested in, we want to be able to build some ADUs to help increase infill and have those ADUs available as rental housing for wildfire survivors. And then the Homeownership Opportunities Program, that is a program that's looking at the development of single-family site build or prefabricated structures. It's moving renters who were impacted by the fires into homeownership opportunities. We want to make sure that we have the opportunity to put and help people into a better place potentially than they were before. So we want to really focus on the ability to move renters to homeownership. We'll look at subsidizing subsidies to incentivize affordable new housing production, and then also provide homeownership assistance. These could be awards to first-time home buyers. They can be fully or partially forgivable, zero interest loans, and then those homes would be maintained as affordable housing for an affordability period. The third is intermediate housing assistance. This
Chelsea,
is, yeah.
I wanted to add one thing there for the council's information. That breakdown that you see between homeowner allocation and renter allocation, really based on our existing data, tracks the impact between homeowners at the time of the disaster and renters at the time of the disaster, which is why you see that allocation being really directly tied to the need following the disaster. So we selected that breakdown based on what our data showed us is necessary for homeowners versus renters.
Thanks for that. And then intermediate housing assistance, talked a bit about that, rental, relocation, and other assistance. And we've increased that, knowing that there's going to be a great need for that funding and those services. And then we've got housing and recovery services and legal services, and those will provide support to the households that are going through the other programs. And then we've got under the multi-sector, that's the planning, infrastructure, and economic revitalization. We added another $2 million, and I talked about that in the previous slide. Direct grant allocations to the 8 most impacted counties. Prioritization of projects will be locally driven. And then the activities must directly or indirectly support new housing and or replacement of damaged housing, and or the mitigation of loss of life or property in the face of current and future natural disasters. And there are various eligible funding recipients, counties, unincorporated areas, nonprofits, school districts, public housing authorities. You heard from Devin earlier with the long-term recovery group. A lot of those folks are on the ground and doing great work. We want to make sure that they continue to be supported. And then last program is the resilience planning program. We decreased that bucket because we moved some of those planning dollars into the multi-sector bucket. We want to make sure that the counties had access to those planning dollars at the same time that they could access the funding for infrastructure and economic revitalization. And so this resilience planning program will focus on regional and statewide recovery, resilience, and mitigation planning that the state would carry out and would cover various things, including housing development strategies, development of construction standards, looking at ways to address environmental injustice, spurring economic growth, creating jobs, public land use, and other activities. And then administrative costs, which we heard about as well. So the quick condensed version, and happy to take questions too. Thank you.
And Chair Hall, I think that ends our presentation. We're happy to take any questions.
All right, council members, do you have any questions on this presentation? Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Chair Hall. I don't have any questions. I just have 2 comments, 3 comments. One is I just want to acknowledge the staff team. This has been an almost unexplainable level of work that they have lifted up, and the hours and hours that were spent in process with people, out of process, trying to figure out what we had just heard. I don't think there are enough words to say how much hard work went into this and how appreciative I am of that. And I will say, as a person who was able to participate in the process, I had a lot of opportunity to speak with staff about various issues and approaches. And I just want to say thank you to the team. I feel listened to, I feel heard, and I think we've heard from some of our partners that they also felt listened to and heard. So I just want a huge bucket of appreciation to you all to lift up 3 things. One is this is step 1. And so sure, there are things that we want to change right now. Are there things that we want to edit right now? Of course there is, and there always will be. The sense that this is a living document is absolutely, I think, understood by the staff team. And I'm hoping we have all heard that. The minute this gets submitted and approved from the feds, we will start on the next iteration, the next iteration, the next iteration. So I just want to appreciate that energy and support the motion being approved. And then the last 2 comments is a second universal goal that I might suggest that we consider adding is one that speaks directly to economic justice. I won't say revitalization, because some of the work we're talking about doing is for communities and households who haven't had economic opportunity up until this point, but a universal goal that speaks directly to economic justice and vitalization development, I think would be the next place I would go. And finally, I just want to lift up the comment, Chelsea, that you made about the median family income and the ways in which when you're doing this averaging across, in this case, geography, it actually can be a disadvantage for geographic areas where there is a lower median family income because of the rent burdens, right? If you take the higher one. I want to recall for us that we have talked about this multiple times over the last 2 years related to race and ethnicity. So we've had a number of conversations about how one median family income can be discriminatory and create additional burdens for communities of color because we're using a mix of a high MFI and lower MFIs. And I just want to say, if we're able to do this geographically, we should be able to do this disaggregated by race and ethnicity. So I'm very excited about that possibility. And I want us not to lose the conversation we've had over the last 2 years related to race and ethnicity and MFI. Thank you.
Councilmember Sandoval.
Yeah, thank you. Chair, I wanted to publicly just praise the staff and say that I'm very pleased with the action plan. I think here we're focusing on people, and we are also really speaking to racial equity issues. I think it's going to be extremely important that we find mechanisms of accountability as we actually put this plan into action. And the other thing is I wanted to thank the ad hoc committee, especially Representative Pam Marsh, who has really been involved in this process and has really provided some great feedback.
And Chair Hall, if I may make one comment before we get into the vote, because this feels like this is all like building up to this vote, but I just want to acknowledge first off Ryan's leadership in this. Like, we just simply could not, and the team could not have done this without this team. And I just want to just publicly acknowledge my appreciation wholeheartedly. And we talked about it a bit at the top of the meeting, but I just want to elevate that for individuals and families impacted to go through that trauma and engage in this process is a lot. That's untenable. That is a lot to put on folks. And I just want to acknowledge that although I was not directly impacted, I can appreciate the difficulty, the untenable burden that might feel day in, day out to go through that trauma and have to engage in what I know is a very lengthy and what probably feels like a very bureaucratic federal process. So just to all of the folks behind the scenes, just much appreciation to everybody who engaged and provided us so much advisement and feedback through this process, and our work is far from over.
Thanks. Any more council input at this point? If not, I would be happy to entertain a motion for approval of the plan.
So moved.
Thank you, Councilmember Lee. Is there a second? And Councilmember Higginbotham has the second. And if we could have a roll call now, please.
Thank you, council members. For the record, Councilmember DeFontorum and Councilmember Mena had to step away for a moment, but they did ask me to record their votes as yeses.
Great.
Councilmember Farrell.
Yes.
Chair Hall.
Yes.
Councilmember Higginbotham.
Absolutely.
Councilmember Lee.
Yes.
Councilmember Sandoval.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes. Congratulations.
Congratulations to all. It is now 11 o'clock and time for our scheduled 15-minute break. So I will recess the meeting at this point, but council members and staff would really appreciate it if you could be ready at 11:15 to promptly resume. Thank you. One, two, let's see, I'm seeing the smiling faces of three others. So I believe that does give us a quorum for this next segment of the meeting. So I'm going to go ahead and reconvene. Hello again, everybody. It's 11:16 on Friday morning, June 3rd, and I would like to reconvene the meeting of the Oregon Housing Stability Council. And the next hour is reserved for presentations and decision items coming to us from the Affordable Rental Housing Division, Natasha Detweiler-Dalby. And we'll turn it to you and your team.
Great, thank you, Chair Hall, Director Bell, and council members. So we have a full slate, so we'll try to keep the pace moving for us here the rest of this morning. And so we're going to kick off with transactions with Ty Dunson Strain. And so I'm gonna let him take over. And I guess before I was going to say, I forgot, there's one thing I was going to say. I just wanted to just do a quick follow up on that on the public comment, just to say that we will be engaging around the testimony that we heard around both milepost 5 and the preservation needs. We'll actually see some preservation recommendations a little bit later on in this presentation slate. So know that it is a concerted interest to preserve, and this expiration of affordable buildings is I think, as Director Bell indicated, a really systemic issue that needs to be continued to be prioritized and centered in our efforts to do funding. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ty to talk about our new projects that we want to be moving forward with today.
More Chair Hall, council members, Director Bell. My name is Ty Dunson Strain, Production Manager, Affordable Rental Housing. And I'm here to present a resolution for four transactions today. Needing approval. A motion is in page 33 of the packet. First, beginning with Malala Apartments. It's sponsored by Greenlight Home First LLC. It's in the city of Malala. It's a total of 60 units, new constructions, includes a range of affordability, and it was previously awarded LIFT funds paired with 4%. The total transaction cost is a little over 20 million. They have partnerships with Mano a Mano and Bienestar, and they target participation is 30% for MWSB. The general contractor is partnering with a host of organizations to help reach that target goal. NAMAC, OMI, to name a few. This project meets three the statewide housing plan goals: equity and racial justice, affordable rental housing, and rural communities. Next project is Saltsman Road Apartments in Portland, sponsored by Home First Development and Christ United Methodist Church. It's 54 units, includes a range of affordabilities. It also is in partnership with the Metro Housing Bond, and there are 24 project-based vouchers. Total project cost is about a little over 21 million. The project includes partnerships with Friendly House, Sage, Metro, and also there are other partnerships that additional outreach is going to be conducted with NAIA, Urban League, and ERCO, and in NY Pilot. The target MWSB population is 30%. This project meets primarily one of our statewide housing goals of affordable rental housing, and we are working towards meeting our state our equity and racial justice goals for this project. The next project is the short acronym we will call it is the Blackburn and Maine project, sponsored by Wish Camper Development and Opportunity Council. It's in Beaverton. It includes a range of affordability. It includes and 164 units. It also includes, in addition to Metro funds, includes MCOF funds and 4% tax credits and bonds, totaling about 85, a little over 85 million. Partnerships include IZO Marketing and Unite Oregon, and additional engagement is going to be with Central Cultural and Apano, to name just a few. They have committed to a MWSB goal of 30%. General contractor is Colas Construction, and this meets two priorities: equity and racial justice and affordable rental housing. And the last project is Plaza Los Amigos. It's 113 units in Cornelia, sponsored by Reach CDC and Vienna Star. Includes range of affordability and Metro bonds, and also includes MCOF funds for a total project of over 48 million. The general contractor LMC has committed to a 30% MWSB participation, and this is furthering our equity and racial justice goals of statewide housing plan and affordable rental housing. With that, I'd ask that you consider the motion on the packet and would open up for any questions.
Questions, feedback from council members? Hearing none, are we ready for a motion for approval of this transaction?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Okay, could we have a roll call, please?
Thank you, council members. Councilmember DeFantorum. Councilmember Farrell.
Yes.
Chair Hall.
Yes.
Councilmember Higginbotham.
Yes.
Councilmember Lee.
Yes.
Councilmember Mena. Councilmember Sandoval.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Great. On to Saltsman Road Apartments.
Chair Hall, could I make one comment before we move? I didn't want to comment
Yeah,
before we
sure.
voted. I just want to acknowledge the new format in both the slide deck and the presentation from staff on these projects, and I think it's really hitting the mark. It's got consistent information in it. It's got visual information in it. The details are all back in our packets, and we don't need to go there, and we're able to see across the projects both the units, the statewide housing plan goals, the racial justice and equity assessments. It really, I appreciate it, and I want to acknowledge the change in movement. I know we'll constantly be iterating on this, but I just want to say thank you. I see it and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilmember Lee, and we'll continue evolving so we can keep the bar high, but I appreciate the feedback. So the next item that we have, Chair Hall and group, is the Becky Isom with our Wildfire Direct project recommendations. And so this ties back to the disaster recovery and resilience conversations that you've had this morning. As you may recall, in our funding calendar efforts for Affordable Rental Housing Division this year, we set aside portions of our resources to go directly to projects in wildfire impacted, most impacted and distressed communities and counties. And so Becky is here to present those for you here today.
Good morning, Housing Council, Chair Hall, and Executive Director Bell. For the record, I am Becky Isom, Senior Program Analyst in the Affordable Rental Housing State Resources Development section. I'm here today to present 4 rental projects and 2 homeownership projects for funding consideration under the Wildfire Direct application process put in place in the LIFT rental and homeownership NOFAs this year. Before we get to the motions, I do want to give you guys an update on the response since the Wildfire Direct application window closed on June 1st. For rental applications, there were two sources of funding. First, we had $30,350,000 in LIFT's Article 11 Q bonds. Then we had $20 million in our GAP funds, which is the term we use for our HGGP and GHAP funds. At the May Housing Council, we brought two Jackson County applications for approval, allocating just over $3 million in LIFT funds and $9 million in GAP funds. And then when we look at our homeownership funds, we offered $15.35 million in Article 11Q homeownership funds. We wanted to include GAP funds since they have a 60-year affordability period like the disaster housing tax credits, since the 20 or 30-year LIFT affordability term wouldn't allow for an option of extending the affordability period to satisfy the loan. After all, we already have a 60-year affordability period from the disaster credits. Because the response for our home ownership funds was not as robust as the rental response, I want to start here. We only received two full applications for the Wildfire Direct home ownership funds, both in urban areas. New Spirit Village is located in Medford and McClay CLT is located in Salem. We did not receive any applications for Clackamas, Douglas, Klamath, and Lynn County set aside, so the remaining $8.29 million will be moved directly to the Wildfire Direct bucket to fully fund projects listed there. Before I show you a table that is similar to the last one for rental, I want to show you how the funds are flowing. The unallocated amount after May's Housing Stability Council for LIFT was $27,168,600 and then $11 million for our GAP funds. By combining the unallocated wildfire homeownership funds, this increases the total available LIFT wildfire rental funds to over $35.45 million. Now, let's turn to the rental application breakdown. As you can see, we have projects in Estacada, Lincoln City, Medford, and Salem. The total request for the GAP funds is $9,987,515, and those funds would be allocated to Summit Gardens and Wacoma Place. The other two projects, Estacada Apartments and Gateway Phase 2, would be allocated $34,895,000 in the combined wildfire LIFT funds. Since I wasn't able to share the map with you last time, I really wanted to do that today. Here on our screen, you can see that there are the 4 Jackson County projects that submitted applications for consideration. The orange dot with a house icon is the homeownership project, and the brown dots with the apartment icon are rental projects. Again, you've already approved the projects on the right side of the screen, the Orchard, Meadows, and Prescott Gardens and Talent Senior Estates or Talent Senior Apartments. And then here are the remaining wildfire requests. Again, the brown dots with apartment icons are rental projects, and the orange dot with a house icon is a homeownership project. Now, looking at these projects through the ERJ spectrum used for ARH projects, one project, Wacoma, is being considered working towards OHCS's ERJ goals, while 2 others are meeting them and 3 more are furthering our goals. By setting up the application path through LIFT, we were looking for sponsors to, as council is so fond of saying, find a way to serve wildfire victims and serve communities of color. The idea was that projects needed to meet the LIFT programmatic goals regardless of the other funding that was included in their capital stack. And overall, this approach worked. We have 3 projects that are working towards furthering OHCS's ERJ goals by hosting or attending listening sessions with culturally specific organizations, then taking back that feedback to help inform the design and style of the units and any amenities in the project. To wrap up, I have 6 projects for funding consideration, 2 homeownership projects and 4 rental projects. I am happy to discuss any questions you have on the materials presented, and otherwise ask that you consider the individual motions on page 56 of your packet.
All right, are we ready for council discussion and decision? Any discussion or questions from council? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
Do we have a second, please?
Just to clarify, Chair, are we voting 6 or do you need to go project by project?
Each individual motion has the type of funding that's in there, and I will leave it to Natasha to clarify.
I think that you can identify that you are doing a motion for all 6 identified recommendations.
Then I second the motion for all 6 projects.
Any more council discussion? Hearing none, let's have a roll call vote, please.
Thank you, council members. Councilmember DeFontorum. Councilmember Farrell.
Yes.
Chair Hall.
Yes.
Councilmember Higginbotham.
Yes.
Councilmember Lee.
Yes.
Councilmember Mena. Councilmember Sandoval.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you, council.
Thank you all. Okay.
Chair Hall, I have one comment.
Okay.
Again, and tell me if you'd rather have these comments before we vote, but I'm not making them to influence the vote. So that's why I'm waiting until afterwards. However, you want me to make them beforehand, I'm happy to do that. I just want to comment that if the rating of furthering equity and racial justice is evidenced by a willingness of the developer to actually ask the people who might live in the housing what they want and need in the housing, I have an issue with that. All of these projects should be asking people who potentially might be living in them what they need and what they want in the housing before they start developing it. And while that is it is one manifestation potentially, depending on who are being asked and how they're being asked, of furthering equity and racial justice, it's unclear to me if that's how those 3 projects got assessed in that way. It raises the question of what's happening for the other ones. And again, I don't need a response about this, but again, as we're continuing to try to fine tune this, I just want to lift that up and pose the question.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Lee. We'll, I think, plan to bring additional information about what those processes really look like from the development community as they embark upon getting all of the necessary pieces aligned to get projects underway. So I think, Chair Hall, I believe next up on the agenda, we have our preservation funding cap update. So I will just go and I'm just going to cover that one myself. Last month we included in the Housing Stability Council packet the information around, we had from the 2022 legislative session had additional resources added into our preservation investments, and so it had provided an update memo last month. We didn't get to focus on it in conversation, but part of that recommendation that we are seeking approval for is around the funding caps that we had in place. There we have, as we were talking about earlier, there are preservation resources that we currently are offering in advance of our competitive NOFA on a, we call them our pool. So it's first come, first reviewed, at least, offering where you have to meet the policy objectives, but that you can otherwise access resources. And so we have one pool for acquisition, which is what I referenced earlier. We do, then this pool is specifically our more kind of a rehab preservation pool where projects are able to do kind of critical but lower cost investments to secure and stabilize housing. And that had been limited to 20,000, let's see, it was limited to 20,000 per unit. In the past, we have added additional resources into that pool with the new legislative investments and are recommending that we increase that to 35,000 per unit. in specifically and directly because we are seeing such escalation in our construction costs that it really it kind of the market shifted, and where that 20,000 was no longer adequate to do the needed level of work. I will say in engagement, this is supported by stakeholders, and in fact, there's an interest in having that limit increased up to more like 50 or 60,000 per unit, at which point we felt like that is more appropriate for our competitive NOFA when we're investing that level of resources in it. And so to that end, on page 72, you'll see a motion to approve the increase of that pool to 35,000 per unit. And if approved, next you will see a project recommendation that is wanting to use that increased limit.
So moved.
I was going to ask for a motion. Thank you, Councilmember Lee. Who's got the second?
Second.
All right, motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Or I'm sorry, roll call.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Councilmember DeFontorum. Councilmember Farrell.
Yes.
Chair Hall.
Yes.
Councilmember Higginbotham.
Yes.
Councilmember Lee.
Yes.
Councilmember Mena. Councilmember Sandoval.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thanks, everybody. All right.
So then I'm just going to run us through here into this. So next up, speaking of preservation, is a preservation pool recommendation. So we have Martin Jarvis here, our state tax credit program analyst. Martin, you're muted, I believe.
Sorry, my face wasn't on the screen and I couldn't see there, so apologies. Good morning, Chair Hall, Director Bell, council members. For the record, my name is Martin Jarvis, State Tax Credits Program Analyst.
Martin, excuse me. I don't know if anyone else is having a problem, but I can just barely hear you right now. So if there's, I don't know, any way you could get closer to your microphone or something.
Let me check my sound real quick.
Okay.
Is that better?
Much better. Thank you.
Yes. My sound was connected to a different microphone.
Oh, okay. Take it away, please.
Okay, I'll give this a second try. Good morning, Chair Hall, Director Bell, council members. For the record, my name is Martin Jarvis, State Tax Credits Program Analyst in the Development, Resources, and Production section of the Affordable Rental Housing Division. I am here to recommend Eagle Cap Apartments, sponsored by Chrisman Development and Trinity Development Alliance, for an allocation of preservation resources. Eagle Cap Apartments applied for funding through our combined pools open application. This is a scattered site preservation project with 91 units of affordable housing located in Enterprise, Elgin, and Joseph in Wallowa and Union counties. This project promotes OHCS's rural development priority. This project also provides family-sized units, workforce units, units for the elderly, and units for persons experiencing disabilities. These units are a significant portion of the available affordable housing in the area. They are currently at risk of loss through expiration of affordability restrictions, and they need rehabilitation to major building systems, as well as health and safety upgrades and energy efficiency updates. The sponsors are requesting $3,185,000 in preservation funds, which is exactly $35,000 per 91 units. This project is considered working toward equity and racial justice goals. They're also in our 4% pipeline, and as they get closer to construction close, they will have done more work to get closer to meeting those goals. I'm happy to discuss any questions on the materials presented and otherwise ask you to consider the motion on page 73 of the packet.
Questions, feedback from council members on this?
So moved.
Okay, thank you.
Second.
You're keeping it moving right along, council. Thank you. Could we have a roll call vote, please?
Thank you, council members. Councilmember DeFantorum. Councilmember Farrell.
Yes.
Chair Hall.
Yes.
Councilmember Higginbotham.
Yes.
Councilmember Lee.
Yes.
Councilmember Mena. Councilmember Sandoval.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Great job, everybody. And let's keep this rolling right along, people.
Absolutely. Thank you all. So next up, excited that we're presenting our Portfolio Stabilization Preservation Fund framework for recommendation approval. And to bring that to you is, if you recall last month, there was information provided in the memo, circulated feedback by email because we couldn't have the discussion. And so I think in this conversation, Kristlyn will be following up on the feedback that we have received from council members who sent it over. So thank you very much for that. And so I'll hand it over to Kristlyn Prantle, the Asset Management and Preservation Manager. And I'll share screens.
Thank you, Natasha. Good morning, Chair Hall, council members, and Executive Director Bell. Thank you all for taking time to review the important information about all the important work we are doing at the Affordable Rental Housing Department. My name is Kristlyn Prantle for the record, and I use she, her pronouns, and I am the manager of the Asset and Preservation Management Unit, which is located inside the Portfolio Administration section of the Affordable Rental Housing Division. This unit is responsible for ensuring the ongoing successful operation of the state's current affordable rental housing inventory. Next slide, please. The adoption of the OHCS statewide housing plan in 2018 was in part in response to overall housing production's inability to keep up with the housing population growth and to maintain a balance between supply and demand. You are all familiar with the ongoing development efforts at the agency to support that important body of work. Next slide, please. It's not enough, however, to build more affordable rental housing if we aren't able to ensure the ongoing successful operation of the state's current portfolio properties. I'm here today to share a pilot program that's designed to promote the development of the framework for a policy option package for the 2023-2025 biennium. Next slide, please. And I promise to slow down. The numbers. Currently, better than 63% of the state's affordable rental housing inventory required to undergo financial and regulatory compliance monitoring by the agency's portfolio administration section have been identified as performing. An assessment based on a variety of indicators, including debt service coverage ratio or DCR, regulatory and compliance audits, and physical inspections. Another 15% have had a history of also performing, but for one reason or another, have an isolated change in performance that's putting the OHCS asset management team on alert. Another 3% are new enough that we're still collecting performance data before we can effectively assign a risk rating. The remaining 19% of the portfolio properties show indications of performance issues for a variety of reasons. It's an important note to clarify here that the data I'm sharing with you today does not necessarily reflect the current conditions, primarily due to the COVID-19 pandemic and a pause that was placed on oversight efforts, as concern for health and safety of the residents was of utmost priority. However, financial performance data, an important risk factor in our assessment, is less than 2 years behind for more than 80% of the properties currently in our risk rating system. Next slide, please. What about that 19%? Most troubled properties, 78% of them, in fact, are experiencing financial performance challenges, while others have multiple risk indicators in addition to just financial operations. The agency's asset management team investigates these at-risk properties and, when necessary, deploys corrective action efforts. When that effort is ineffective or insufficient, the agency can exercise a variety of options where applicable, such as loan deferral, principal and interest payment forbearance, reamortization, loan forgiveness, and interest rate adjustments. Those resources are limited, however, to properties that are funded through OHCS resources. In cases where projects are only holding debt from third parties, we're limited in our ability to provide short and long-term relief to ensure project sustainability. Financial instability does not always correlate with operational irregularities. Other drivers may include major system degradation and/or health and safety issues as identified by capital needs assessments or the property's OHCS risk rating, requiring some level of rehabilitation. Often the only option available to stabilize these properties and preserve their useful life boils down to a comprehensive recapitalization, which in some cases can be years before the affordability covenants are set to expire. Otherwise, our property management partners looking to improve cash flow, cover unexpected capital projects, or replenish important replacement reserves have no choice but to increase the rents. The 2022 Multifamily Tax Subsidy Program, MTSP as we call it, income limits used to determine income qualification levels, as well as maximum rental rates for projects, which currently was released by HUD just late in April, included in some instances increases to maximum allowable rents not seen in years. Next slide, please. This portfolio stabilization preservation fund would serve as a flexible resource that could enable the agency to respond to specific project needs intended to recast operational budgets. The use of this resource could come with specific expectations and stipulations designed to protect the tenant populations from significant rent increases. These protections could come in the form of limiting increases for a specific period of time, the implementation of tenant protection account intended to normalize the rent increases while establishing or reestablishing, in some cases, program level rents, or capital infusion with low or no interest rate loans, for example. In addition to potential opportunity to limit or incrementally titrate rent increases, other benefits associated with this resource may include a reduction in the overall number of at-risk properties for the state's portfolio, a reduction in the number of rehab NOPA applications for existing properties under 30 years of age, improve the ability for the agency to better respond to legislative developments involving environmental changes, and improve living conditions for residents, just to name a few. Unlike other agency funding opportunities, the mechanism for accessing the Portfolio Stabilization Preservation Fund as a resource would not include a solicitation for projects through competitive NOFA or Notice of Funding Availability, since most drivers of risk are identified by the property's OHCS risk rating review process. As such, portfolio administration's asset managers will already be actively involved with these struggling properties. Part of that engagement can include corrective action plans, or what portfolio administration calls property improvement plans. Part of those workout plans may include comprehensive recapitalization as part of their strategy, if a less expensive and if a less costly option such as this fund is not available. The establishment of a portfolio stabilization fund will expand the list of tools that this team has to intervene with properties at risk, and to use such funds would only be considered after all options have been exhausted. And even then, it's likely that it will be in combination with other remedies as well. Next slide. In addition to OHCS's affordable rental housing plan priority to close the gap between supply and demand, The Portfolio Stabilization Preservation Fund also aligns with another important priority, which is one that charges us to identify and address barriers that have created and perpetuated patterns of disparity in housing and economic prosperity. As you can imagine, many at-risk properties in our portfolio were developed long before the integration of various expectations that have new development projects, which are required to include as part of the agency's effort to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion, to prevent equities and racial disparities in the communities where these properties are established. In addition to potential extensions and affordability periods and project-specific expectations aimed at addressing the risk factors, projects receiving funding will be encouraged to engage MWESB and other underserved disadvantaged certified organ businesses, as with all development projects and department administered programs. Funding applications will be required to submit a signed EDI agreement, committing those recipients to making strides within their organizations and its work toward diversity, equity, and inclusion as outlined in that agreement. And in addition, the setting of these ERJ expectations, the portfolio administration section will be confirming project satisfaction with compliance with the established resident service plan and affordable fair housing marketing plans as part of the property's ongoing performance reviews. For many of these properties, these expectations will be the first of that kind. Next slide, please. The Affordable Rental Housing Division is recommending the use of $5 million of resources allocated in the 2022 legislative session for preservation investments and $5 million in repurposed or undersubscribed gap resources from the current funding calendar. We believe that a $10 million portfolio stabilization preservation fund would allow for a programmatic launch that would stabilize several properties, demonstrate utility and impact of this model. Through this effort, we could assist our affordable rental housing partners in identifying workable solutions and not just rent increases. Next slide, please. Just our last slide. I'm grateful to be here to present this exciting pilot program. And of course, I'm available to answer any questions or contemplate any comments that the council members may have regarding this presentation, or if the information can see the information contained in the packet. Otherwise, I ask that you please consider this motion listed on page 77 of your packet to approve the framework for the Portfolio Stabilization Preservation Fund to launch this pilot project with $10 million of Affordable Rental Housing Division's flexible programmatic resources. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions or feedback from the council? Councilmember Higginbotham.
I had a couple of questions. The first one, just because I'm trying to pull together the pieces, is the ombudsman position that we talked about earlier, is that a position that might interact with these properties and help them mitigate, the situations that they're in? And the other question that I had just had to do with how the funds are distributed. There's a little a picture that shows rural and urban and preserved affordable housing, but I didn't see anything, and if it's in there, I'm sorry, about how the funds are their priorities, or is it just completely open to metro, urban, rural, anybody?
Maybe I'll take a first stab, not having three-dimensionality around the potential ombuds person, but I think functionally I would think it would work in that it would be a point of contact that would make sure to be connecting projects and project identified needs with our asset management group, which is really responsible for intervening, understanding when there are issues and concerns going on, to be able to do that. And I think it's that same mechanism that is going to let this fund investment support project needs. And so I think, as Chrislyn kind of talked through, it not being open today, competitive award, everybody solicit resources, but more it's an interactive process as projects are experiencing, either through the risk rating system that the asset management supports on an ongoing basis, or if projects are experiencing financial challenge and it hasn't been alerted to the risk rating yet, they would be able and encouraged to reach out to the asset managers to identify the most workable solutions where the resources needs are so much that it would really be best served through a competitive offering. It would say, you really need, complete resyndication and refunding. Let's go into a NOFA. But where it is, let's say, we could say if you resolved this other third-party debt, you would be able to be operational moving forward and you would be out of a risk situation. Then that might be a lesser level of investment. It would be able to stabilize them. And then asset management group puts into place performance plans and expectations, would be able to put into place, restrictions on, further limiting rent increases and really making sure that there is a strong package moving forward, and expectations around, ensuring that there's adequate equity and racial justice, and focus on communities of color through provided resident services, and those types of things. But that it is, and so in that way, I think for it is critical, of course, that we want to make sure that there is not that it's not all invested in urban in areas. And so I think that's going to be, as we are continuing, as we launch this pilot, and I think again, as this is the pilot, and we're planning to request additional resources to retain it, but that we would be able to have kind of clear reporting out of it so that we can have a lens on where and how it's invested.
Thank you. I just have to say, Natasha, I really appreciate the way you can just break things down and make them understandable and take the time to answer all my questions. And I really appreciate it. Thanks.
Anytime.
Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Thank you for this presentation. I'm appreciating how it's touching on a lot of things we've talked about this entire meeting, and I like when that happens. A couple of comments and reflections. I know we're trying to find this balance between trying to hold people accountable for conditions and realities that are in addition to the financial ones, and not wanting to make that so onerous that a project owner decides that they're going to go to market rate because they don't want to meet the conditions. So I want to acknowledge that there's a tension here that we're trying to find, and also say that this is one of the few moments where we might have some leverage, is in this moment where a project is saying, I'm in trouble, help me. And we want to condition, I'm going to be absolutely clear, we want to condition our help on some behavior changes and some response. Now, I say that assuming that the vast, if not all of our developers and project owners got into this because they were mission oriented. This isn't a wealth building necessarily. This is a mission orientation, unless they've sold the asset. Given that people in a mission orientation, these moments where we can actually have impact and leverage, I think, are super critical ones, even as it might feel perhaps a little conditional, right? I want us to be explicit about that. The first thing I want to say is, yes, support this link to the ombudsperson position. Commissioner Higginbotham, you're right on to ask for that connection. I also want to perhaps include some consideration for complaints as a metric that is taken into consideration as you all are trying to figure out what's the right way to go forward with this project, what's the right amount of support. And maybe as a balance to that is, are there complaints? How many complaints? Which of these complaints are still open? Someone who says, look, I know that's not working. We're all human. That's not happening. And here's what I'm doing to remediate. or they're in relationship with us and responding appropriately to the complaints that we have received through their ombuds program to be able to be responsive, right? Some version of that consideration into the mix as you're trying to figure out who gets help and how much help would be of interest to me. And then I also want to be super clear that encouraging equity and racial justice at this moment is not adequate. We need to require it. And I understand that, you know, the DEI agreements is a new thing for folks. That is the minimum. That is the least. That's almost insubstantial. So I want us to have an approach and a conversation as we're calculating who's going to get what is not a very a big amount of programming assistance, that they're required. And if they haven't done it to this point, okay, no blame or shame, but from this moment forward, understand what this agency's priorities are and understand what our expectations are around sincere and legitimate engagement with racial justice and equity throughout their organization and throughout this project is a requirement, not an encouragement, as we try to figure out who's going to get access to these limited funds. Thank you.
Okay, now I think, is there anything else on that subject? If not, I think we're ready to move on to the LIHTC and PAB update.
Well, I think we had put forward a motion to approve,
I'm sorry.
that program. I think, you know, to Councilmember Lee's comments, I think absolutely will incorporate within a requirement to have an equity and racial justice strategy. And I think we can kind of build in, you know, we have equity and diversity inclusion office and try to have representation and additional eyes and conversation in that. I'll also take this opportunity to say that we are our capacity analyst is launching our actual capacity RFP for service providers and culturally specific providers to provide additional supports to projects that had not had them. So I'm really excited that that is moving forward, and I think can be tied. All of these things should and can be tied together to make sure that there's a really concerted lens on that. But so I think we would be Chair Hall looking. Kristen, what page was that motion on?
77.
I think I heard a motion from Councilmember Lee to approve. Yes, would somebody offer a second?
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second. Could we have a roll call, please?
Thank you, council members. Councilmember DeFantorum.
Yes.
Councilmember Farrell.
Yes.
Chair Hall.
Yes.
Councilmember Higginbotham.
Yes.
Councilmember Lee.
Yes.
Councilmember Mena.
Yes, I just want to say one quick thing that I think it's an exciting new program that is has been needed, and I like the parameters that have been put forward. So thank you.
Councilmember Sandoval.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And so then I think last but not least is just an update on the 4% low-income housing tax credit and private activity bond effort. And I'm going to share just a quick presentation, PowerPoint. Everything was moving too fast for me to feel like writing a memo was going to adequately give me prophecy over what was happening as of this date. So this is a real-time update. And I guess contextually, just as a reminder, private activity bond use is what generates 4% tax credits. We are out of the place where we have savings of that private activity bond authority, and so are really at our limit, and we are in a oversubscribed situation moving forward. So are really working in on all cylinders to try to update and recast this program under some a version of a competitive lens. I'm really excited to let you know that OHCS has gotten to agreement with our housing authority, the housing authorities of Oregon, to be in partnership on a shared pipeline for investments of private activity bonds to go to OHCS for investments into affordable housing investments. And so, and in that vein, with Housing Stability Council as our policy advisor, as we work to relaunch program efforts. We do have a legislative concept that you'll see in or have seen in the agency request budget that is around private activity bonds. And with our partnership in place, our partnership agreement in place, a part of that request for legislative session is to update our statutory authority to make sure that when OHCS receives authority, we are able to let you kind of designate the housing authorities to be the bond issuer on projects where OHCS is not invested state loans and grants into projects. And that is what the housing authorities have been doing already, except they've been going directly to the private activity bond committee. And so this is kind of changing that, where we are trying to funnel housing investments through OHCS so that we can be planful and really make sure that we're aligning with policy priorities. In terms of just generic around private activity bond and the 4% credit, the demand continues to exceed supply from all modeling and solicitations for at least the next several years. And so that's this year, as well as, I would say 23, 24, and 25. We are in a constrained environment, and we'll see what it looks like after that point. But really feeling like this is where it's really critical for us to identify a competitive structure, which I will say is not, I'm not thinking that that's a NOFA, but it's really more of a clarity of how we are prioritizing investments, working with other funders, other public funders to provide clarity and certainty, and retaining commitment to investments in rural Oregon so that those don't get overshadowed by the resources that we see in urban areas of the state. And that in that process, it's going to be critical for us to have crisp and clear criteria around prioritizing investments where we see that there are too many projects or too many resource asks in a given bucket or kind of policy priority area. And so that's the kind of thing that I think we're going to be seeking council input on. We are otherwise just, other updates, continuing to work with our metro funding jurisdiction. I think part of what led us to a place of oversubscription has been the benefit of significant investment from the state and local funders, including the metro bonds that was passed in the Portland metropolitan area, which is a blessing, and we need to identify how we kind of move forward together. I think it might have been last month, approved OHCS proactively layering some of our gap resources into metro projects to help provide a little bit of relief there. And we're continuing to just be in contact and in conversation on a weekly, if not more, basis with our metro partners. Cost increases I put on here, it's not directly private activity bonds, but it is continuing to be a plague on our pipeline. And these are unavoidable cost increases. Our market cost offset intervention has been working in earnest. You have an update on that in the packet, not prioritized for discussion, but but the fact is that as costs increase in projects, so too is the private activity bond requests increase, because that place where 50% of costs needs to be covered with private activity bonds, when your total costs are increasing, it starts to scale up those dollars on a project by project basis, which really puts an already constrained environment on an even more constrained landscape. So we are pursuing all strategies. I'm really happy we have a technical advisor on board from Novogradac, who's been really helpful in framing conversations and providing insight and expertise around all of the different ways that things can manifest. So that's really helpful. And I think like this is, I'd say, the short list of the things that we know we need to be addressing in a programmatic update. Both policies around our future pipeline and management, what the process actually looks like, what documents look like, and then what the policies are. I think that there has been, you know, certainly around traditionally our 4% tax credit program has only had a 30-year affordability requirement. With this transition to competitive, I think it's a place where we could decide to make that also under a 60-year affordability lens, consistent with our other resources, wanting to make sure that we're designating resources for rural investments, for preservation investments, as we know and hear around the expiry of projects and the devastation that that provides to tenants when their home is no longer affordable housing that they moved into. Making sure that we are retaining resources for preservation is certainly critical. And then certainly, most certainly and clearly, making sure that within that programmatic delivery, we are having another, you know, having that deliberate strategy and perspective on equity and racial justice. So next steps and timeline, the team is part inspired by our technical advisor for sure. We are embarking and digging in deep on developer team interviews with development teams that have projects either under construction or in the pipeline right now. And so that's 20 to 30 different development teams that we have scheduled for the next couple weeks. June 22nd, this is the announcement. I will need to send out an advisory, but we'll be holding an outreach meeting to get input and feedback from broader community. In July, we'll be aiming to bring to Housing Stability Council our lessons learned, what we've learned from that input process, as well as initial recommendations around the program and policy priorities. We'll schedule, I just didn't get it on the calendar before right now, another outreach and input conversation in July. The next private activity bond committee meeting as a reference point is July 20th. And then our hope at this point is that in August, we're feeling like we've heard voices, we have a solid structure to recommend incorporating your feedback, and then we would be bringing that for consideration. I think it's likely to trigger the need to do a qualified allocation plan update and all of that blessing. So I think that's where we want to both get to across the finish line, because I think there is, I don't just think, there is a lot of angst and anxiety from development partners and jurisdictions around needing to have certainty about resource access now. And so the sooner we can get there, the better. And just need to be able to be executing this so that we are going into the next calendar year with some good clarity and strategies in hand. So I think that was really all I had to update with you on that. And yeah, I think that's it. Any questions?
Thanks for an information-packed report, and we will see. Okay, Councilmember Lee, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Thanks, Natasha. Everything you just updated on, I think of perhaps ignorantly as the financing side of the House and our responsibilities related to being a housing finance agency. And we've had a lot of conversation about just not feeling as a council that we've got a big depth on the bench around our housing finance agency responsibilities. So I'm wondering, within that very abbreviated timeline, and it may not be possible, if there's any way for there to be some kind of a teach-in for those of us, and I'll out myself, who are not on the housing, on the finance side of things, to just get grounded in, what is a housing finance agency and what are our roles and responsibilities? And Natasha, when you talked about having consultants, I remember a couple of years ago, we met with some finance consultants around housing finance agency and their recommendations and just learning. It has nothing to do with the specific pieces that you're teeing up for us. However, I think it would help us make better decisions and understand our recommendations better if we could understand more about that role. And if I'm the only one who's a little bit sketchy on this, I can also hear that. And I really want us to be building our muscle as a council related to the finance side of this organization. I think it's so critical for us. So if there's any way to think about some of that as the frame or the background in which you're going to do the specific things you just covered with us, I would surely appreciate it. And if it needs to be offline for just me, I'm happy to hear that too.
So I will take that one, Tasha, if you don't mind. So Councilmember Lee, yes, yes, and more yes. So you are hitting on some really important things that I think tie into, and I will be mindful of time, Chair Hall, is one, Councilmember Lee, I think this is a good time to take stock because we're talking about a new budget cycle, and a changing environment. And not everybody's living in the housing finance world. Natasha and her team have a deep level of expertise, and they are in the gory details of it. And we want to make sure that we can hit a refresher and do sort of a one-on-one with council. We're all perpetual learners. So yes, in that, I think the timing of it is also advantageous because, to Councilmember Sandoval's point, there's also some needing to take stock and clarity of council members' role. And so as we talk about that, certainly intersects. And then I will just elevate, and I'll have more substantive updates to come, is we also have a couple of vacancies on the council, of which we will also be bringing back that level of really sort of specific expertise on the financing side too. So yes, and more to come. But I think in the meantime, we see that as an action item for us to engage the council, Chair Hall, offline on to get some time to really talk through the housing finance specifics and roles. So we will take that back as an action item to work with you on.
All right. Anything else from council or staff? And I think we're at the point for adjournment of today's meeting. Thanks everyone for participating. And just a reminder that Director Bell, Councilmember Farrell, and I will be jumping right into another meeting to discuss a council survey that is in the works. So we'll see you all at the beginning of July. Hard to believe that it's that close, but we'll see you then. And thank you all. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.